Have you ever wondered what secrets still lie hidden beneath the earth? What stories do ancient masks, temples, and ruins still try to tell us? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the place where history's mysteries are brought back to life in calm detail. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, let's begin. The golden mask that smiled through death. They say gold never dies. It does not rust, nor decay, nor crumble into dust the way bones do. And yet, when it is pressed into the shape of a face belonging to someone who has been gone for thousands of years, the gold seems to carry an echo, a whisper of laughter, a silence that looks like speech about to happen. And sometimes, as with one mask found in the hills of Bulgaria, it carries a smile, not the wide grin of joy, but a calm, knowing smile, the kind worn by someone who sees what others cannot. It began in the Thracian lands, where the rivers cut through valleys, and the low mountains roll into plains that shimmer in the summer heat. Beneath these hills, in burial mounds older than kingdoms, lie treasures buried with the dead. The Thracians, a people both mysterious and proud, filled their tombs with objects they believed would travel into the afterlife: weapons, vessels, jewelry, and sometimes masks. Masks of gold pressed so thin they could cling to the very lines of a person's face. Masks that could transform death into a preserved eternity. The mask in question, the one that smiled, was uncovered in the early years of the 21st century, but it was not new to time. It had been waiting for more than 2.5 millennia, hidden beneath earth, that was never meant to be disturbed. Archaeologists approached the mound where it rested, expecting the usual: stones, bones, fragments. But when the soil was brushed away, the face of gold appeared, luminous even in the dimness of the trench. It seemed at first almost alive. The lips were drawn upward, curved in that faint, unsettling smile. The eyes, though closed, suggested they had just blinked. The discovery site lay in the Valley of the Thracian Kings, near Kazanlak, where dozens of tombs of rulers and nobles have been unearthed. This particular tomb was modest compared to others. Yet what it yielded was remarkable: a mask belonging to a man of high standing, perhaps a ruler, perhaps a warrior chief. The Thracians buried their elite with ceremony, and the mask was more than ornament. It was protection. It was passage. It was passage. It was the immortal covering of a mortal face. But what made this mask different was its expression. Most golden death masks from ancient times, whether from Thrace, Mycenae, or elsewhere, are solemn, rigid, cold. This one was serene, composed, yet smiling. It was as though the man buried within knew a secret, as though he mocked death itself. Or perhaps as though he welcomed it, crossing into the shadowed realm with satisfaction, knowing his name would not fade. To understand the mask, one must understand the Thracians. They were a people who lived in the lands of what is now Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, dwelling between great civilizations but remaining fiercely independent. The Thracians drank deeply of wine, honored their gods with ecstatic rituals, and believed in the persistence of the soul beyond death. They buried their leaders in tombs shaped like homes, chambers with painted walls, pillars, stone beds. To them, death was not an end, but a relocation. A soul moved on, and gold was the passport that shimmered in the hands of gods. The golden mask was crafted with precision. Sheets of hammered gold were pressed against a mold, forming the contours of nose, cheeks, and lips. The details were subtle, yet deliberate. The rise of the cheekbones, the softness of the mouth, the asymmetry of the smile. It was not a generic mask. It was personal. This was someone's face, remade to endure beyond flesh. The man whose skull it once covered had long since turned to dust, but his golden double remained. As archaeologists studied it, the smile became the focus of whispers. Some said it was proof of Thracian artistry, capturing individuality centuries before realism became common. Others wondered if it had ritual meaning. Did the smile reflect triumph over death? Did it signal divine favor, a soul at peace? Or was it a warning, a reminder that death smiles at us all? The valley where it was found has yielded many treasures: horse burials, silver vessels, weapons inlaid with gems. Yet the golden mask eclipsed them with its human intimacy. Here was not just wealth, but personality. A presence that survived 2,000 years in silence, waiting beneath layers of earth until the modern age stumbled upon it. And in that moment of discovery, time blurred. Imagine the archaeologist brushing away the soil and finding a face looking back. Not a skull, not a relic of decay, but a gleaming visage, smiling faintly. For an instant, the barrier between centuries thins. The dead returns, not in flesh, but in gold. Legends began to rise around it, as they always do. Some whispered that the mask was cursed, that those who handled it felt unease, as if watched. A few workers on the excavation swore they saw it differently, under changing light, the smile widening, the lips parting ever so slightly, as if ready to speak. Others dismissed it as imagination, the mind's trick when confronted with something uncanny. But even in dismissal, the unease lingered. In museums, gold is silent, sterile under glass. But in the tomb, in the earth, the mask had lived another life. It had been buried with ritual, perhaps accompanied by chants, incense, and blood sacrifice. The Thracians believed the gods attended such burials, and the dead conversed with them. The mask was not art, it was a threshold. To strip it from its resting place was to break an ancient pact. The Thracian world itself is elusive. They left few writings, their stories carried instead by Greek historians, who described them as both noble and savage, lovers of music, horses, and battle. Their kings were warrior priests, their treasures hidden in barrows and sanctuaries. The golden mask is one of the rare pieces that speaks without words. It shows not how they lived, but how they died, and how they wished to be remembered. The man behind the mask, who was he? A ruler of a tribe? A priest of Dionysus? God of ecstasy and wine? A warlord who fell in battle? His name is lost, erased by centuries, yet his face remains. The smile fixed in gold becomes his legacy. Not his deeds, not his kingdom, but his expression. Imagine if all that survived of you was the curve of your lips, immortalized in metal, seen by strangers in a distant future. Gold has its own memory. It reflects not only light, but also time. In ancient Egypt, kings wore golden masks to resemble gods. In Mycenae, warriors were buried beneath golden sheets pressed into faces. In Thrace the practice was rarer, but when it appeared, it marked someone of immense importance. To be covered in gold was to merge with eternity. Flesh dies, bone breaks, but gold endures, carrying the likeness of the departed as a message across ages. And yet, it is the smile that unsettles. A mask can be blank, expressionless, a barrier, but this one invites, hints, provokes. It does not weep, it does not rage, it smiles. What did the Thracians intend? Perhaps they wanted to remind the living that death was not to be feared. Perhaps they wanted the dead to enter the afterlife with grace. Or perhaps, unknowingly, they left behind a riddle, a face that would puzzle future generations as much as it comforted its own. Now the mask rests in safekeeping, guarded in a museum. Visitors gaze at it through glass, leaning close to study its contours. Some smile back unconsciously, mirroring it. Others step away, disturbed by its serenity. Children press hands to the display, fascinated by the idea of a golden face belonging to someone who has been gone so long. Scholars measure, photograph, publish papers. Yet none of this strips the mask of its mystery. Because in truth, it is not simply an artifact, it is an encounter. The gold holds not just a man's features, but a trace of presence. When you look into its faint smile, you are not just seeing metal. You are meeting someone who lived, who ruled, who died, and who, even now, smiles through death. And so the mask waits, as it has always waited. In the soil, in the tomb, in the museum, it smiles. It smiles as though it knows that one day, long after we too are gone, others will come and stand before it. They will wonder, as we do now, at the mystery of the face in gold. And they will feel the same flicker of unease, the same recognition that death does not silence. Sometimes, death smiles back. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, hidden beneath Teotihuacan's ashes. Beneath the golden haze of the Valley of Mexico, where the high plateau stretches wide beneath an endless sky, there rests a city built of stone, shadow, and silence. Teotihuacan, the city of the gods, long abandoned before the Aztecs arrived, carries in its ruined walls stories that reach back nearly 2,000 years, its great avenues, its pyramids rising like patient mountains, and its hidden chambers whisper of a world once alive with color, incense, and devotion. And buried within its ashes lies a temple, one unlike any other, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The very name stirs curiosity, a serpent adorned with feathers, both creature of the earth and bird of the skies, a bridge between two realms. To the people who built Teotihuacan, this god embodied power, fertility, creation, and destruction. But the temple itself, hidden, buried, nearly forgotten, guards mysteries that still haunt the imagination. Its facade was once a riot of stone carvings, each serpent head pushing outward, its fangs bared, its scales adorned with shells and symbols. Yet behind its beauty, evidence of ritual, sacrifice, and secrecy rests. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine approaching Teotihuacan, not as it is today, in weathered ruin, but as it might have been at its height, around the 3rd century of our era. The Avenue of the Dead stretches before you, a wide thoroughfare, lined with platforms and temples. At its northern end rises the Pyramid of the Moon. To the east the towering Pyramid of the Sun. And there, toward the southern end of the avenue, stands the smaller but striking pyramid of the feathered serpent. Unlike the massive geometric simplicity of the larger pyramids, this one is ornate, covered with sculpted heads that seem to burst from the stone itself. The plaza around it is alive with movement. Priests carrying incense burners, worshippers bringing offerings, guards standing stern at its base. The smell of copal resin fills the air. The distant sound of drums, their rhythm steady, pulses through the stones beneath your feet. The temple looms ahead, each serpent carved with astonishing precision, its mouth open as though speaking. Some faces are not serpents but masks of other beings, creatures of storm, of water, of life-giving rain. Together they tell a story of duality, of forces that give and forces that take away. But the most unsettling secret of this temple lies not in what is seen, but in what was hidden. Archaeologists, when they began to dig beneath the structure in the early 20th century, uncovered something grim, the remains of over 200 individuals buried within the foundations. Men, women, and even children, arranged carefully, accompanied by offerings of obsidian blades, jewelry, and animals. Many bore signs of ritual sacrifice. Their deaths, it seems, were not accidents but deliberate offerings to sanctify the temple itself. The feathered serpent demanded life to be fed into its stones. Picture it. The temple newly built, its stones gleaming, its carvings freshly painted in red, blue, and white pigments. Before its dedication, hundreds of captives brought into its shadow, their lives ended in the name of gods, their blood mingling with the earth. To the builders, this was not cruelty, but necessity. A structure meant to channel divine power required offerings proportionate to its importance. The scale of sacrifice at this temple suggests it was a project of immense significance. And yet there is more. Beneath the temple runs a tunnel, a passage hidden for centuries. Only in recent decades was it rediscovered. Archaeologists, using ground-penetrating radar, located a sealed entrance. Digging carefully, they entered and found themselves in a subterranean world. The tunnel stretched for hundreds of feet, filled with clay, stone, and offerings left long ago. Inside, they discovered strange and shimmering pools of liquid mercury, glittering as though mimicking rivers of the underworld. They found pyrite crystals, fragments of jade, shells from distant seas, and figurines. The tunnel, scholars believe, was meant to represent a passage into the underworld, the realm of gods and ancestors. As you walk in your mind through that tunnel, picture its narrow walls, the weight of earth pressing above, the darkness lit only by the flicker of torchlight. The air is heavy, the silence broken only by your breath. At your feet, the mercury gleams like liquid silver, reflecting strange, dancing lights. It is an uncanny place, both beautiful and unsettling. This hidden passage was perhaps used only by priests, those who entered to commune with divine powers, to bury offerings, or to conduct secret rituals. The temple above, vibrant and alive with ceremony, and the tunnel below, hushed and shadowed, form a duality just like the feathered serpent itself. Sky and earth, life and death, the world above and the underworld below. Over the centuries, the city of Teotihuacan thrived. Tens of thousands lived here, its influence reaching across Mesoamerica. Traders brought goods from the Gulf Coast, from Oaxaca, from the Maya lands far to the east. Teotihuacan was not merely a city, it was a power, a hub, perhaps even an empire. And at its spiritual heart, this temple stood as both a warning and a promise. But then, mysteriously, the city declined. Around the 6th century, fires swept through parts of Teotihuacan. Palaces burned, temples were damaged, murals defaced. It seems there was unrest, perhaps rebellion, perhaps collapse from within. The pyramid of the feathered serpent, too, was buried in part, covered by later construction. What was once adorned and celebrated was hidden, its memory slipping into silence. When the Aztecs arrived centuries later, they found Teotihuacan already a ruin. They gave it its name, the City of the Gods, believing that it was here, in this sacred place, that the gods once gathered to create the world. They walked among the crumbling pyramids, in awe, unsure who had built them. The temple of the feathered serpent lay partly hidden, its secrets still intact. Today, visitors to Teotihuacan see the pyramid as a weathered ruin. Much of its ornamentation is worn, its colors long faded, but the serpent heads remain, staring outward with their unblinking eyes. Standing before them, one feels both wonder and unease. Behind those stones lie the remains of hundreds of sacrificed lives. Beneath them lies a tunnel that still whispers of ceremonies lost to time. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent is not simply a monument, it is a story in stone, a message across centuries. It tells us of a people who sought to balance life and death, to connect earth and sky, to ensure their city's survival through devotion and blood. It reminds us that civilizations rise not only through conquest and trade, but through belief. Belief so powerful that it demanded human lives as its price. As the sun sets over Teotihuacan today, the stones glow orange, and the shadows lengthen across the Avenue of the Dead. The air cools, the tourists drift away, and the city returns to silence. In that silence, if you listen carefully, perhaps you can still hear the echoes of drums, the whispers of prayers, the hiss of serpents that were never alive, yet have never entirely died. The feathered serpent rests in its temple of ash and stone, its mystery enduring, its power unbroken. And so the temple remains, buried, revealed, studied, yet never fully understood, a monument both to human ingenuity and to the unfathomable depths of ancient belief. The talking stone tablets of the silent city. Have you ever stood before a wall of stone so old, so deeply carved with lines that seem both purposeful and undecipherable that you felt as if it were waiting for you to speak back? In the highlands of Peru, there are stones like these, flat slabs, squared, and set with uncanny precision, covered in shallow etchings that resemble words but belong to no known language. Locals whisper that they are tablets, the remains of a silent city long forgotten, a place where stones themselves were once believed to speak. Let us begin slowly, step by step, through this strange and quiet landscape. Imagine the thin mountain air, cooler than the valleys below, brushing lightly across your skin. The world feels both vast and hushed, the horizon broken only by jagged ridges, their peaks brushing the clouds. You tread along narrow paths that wind upward, following trails once carved by human hands centuries before. On either side, terraced slopes step down in neat formations, overgrown with wild grass where crops once thrived. The ground holds memory here, layers of labor, persistence, and long abandonment. Somewhere ahead lies a place people call La Ciudad Silenciosa, the Silent City. There are no clear records of its name in ancient times, nor any kingdom that claimed it, but scattered travelers, chroniclers, and even archaeologists have carried away rumors. The ruins are not sprawling like Machu Picchu, nor elaborate with grand palaces or temples. Instead, they sit quietly, a handful of stone foundations, a plaza, and most curiously, a cluster of standing slabs covered with lines that look uncannily like text. Yet no one has ever been able to read them. You come into the clearing slowly, hearing the sound of your own breath settle. The earth flattens into a natural platform, ringed by cliffs on three sides. And there they are, massive, upright tablets of stone, their surfaces smoothed, then etched with careful precision. Unlike the flowing artistry of Inca stonework, or the imagery of Nazca pottery, these carvings resemble neither figures nor animals. They appear instead as a script, rows of shapes and symbols, repeated and varied, as though they were words from a language frozen in time. Approach closer, and the scale of them grows more surreal. Each slab is taller than a person, some twice the height, anchored deep into the soil, as if planted like trees. Time has weathered their surfaces, but not destroyed them. Even after centuries of rain and wind, the lines remain crisp enough to trace with your fingertip. If you press your hand against the stone, it feels cool, and beneath the roughness of its age, you sense an uncanny order. People who visit speak of a strange sensation, that when they stand quietly among the stones, they feel as though the air hums, or that a murmur rises faintly in their ears. Not a clear voice, not even a language, but the sense that sound is there, just beyond comprehension. Some call it imagination, the mind's attempt to explain a mystery. Others say the stones still carry the voices of those who inscribed them, trapped somehow within their mineral veins. The silent city itself holds little else, which makes these tablets all the more haunting. Around them are the outlines of low walls, squared foundations, faint steps that seem to lead nowhere. The plaza feels abandoned in mid-use, as if its people simply vanished one morning and left the stones to keep their secrets. Pottery shards are scattered in the soil, fragments too plain to hint at grandeur. There are no gold ornaments, no elaborate statues, no rich offerings. Only these carved stones, speaking with their silence. Archaeologists who have studied them return with frustration. Some argue the lines are not writing at all, but counting marks, astronomical records, or decorative patterns. Yet the regularity of the strokes, their repeated shapes and arrangements, suggest intention beyond art. Attempts to match them to Quechua, to Aymara, even to earlier Andean tongues like the elusive Puquina, yield nothing. They remain untranslatable. One theory says they may be connected to the quipu, the knotted strings used by the Inca to keep records. Perhaps the slabs were visual extensions of memory, an earlier experiment in storing knowledge outside the body, before writing as we know it. Another theory is older still, that these tablets belong to a culture predating the Inca entirely, one whose voice was erased before history could take note. Imagine a small community here, centuries or even millennia ago. They gather in the plaza, perhaps under the dim glow of torches, their shadows flickering across the carved slabs. The air is thin, the night is cold, yet the tablets stand firm, gleaming faintly in the firelight. A figure steps forward, perhaps a priest or a keeper of memory. They run their hands across the lines, tracing the sequence of symbols, and then they speak, not reading, but reciting. The stones in this way are not books but prompts, reminders for a story or a chant passed from mouth to mouth. In this imagining, the stones did not speak on their own, but they guided the voices of humans who gave them life. But another layer of story lingers. Local legend insists the stones are not merely reminders, but living recorders. That in the stillness of night, if one listens carefully, the tablets echo with whispers of those who once stood before them. They are said to capture sound, to hold it, as if each carved line is a groove of memory. And sometimes, when wind moves through the plaza just so, people claim the tablets speak, not in full sentences, but in murmurs like breath across stone. To imagine this, stand in the clearing alone, with the mountains towering overhead. The stars are sharp, bright against the black sky, and the silence is deep, broken only by the faint rush of wind. Then, as the breeze slides between the slabs, you hear something unexpected, a faint vibration, almost a sigh. Your heart catches, for it seems not random, but shaped, as if words nearly form, though no human tongue can decipher them.
The talking tablets as the silent city.
Why was the city abandoned? That question has no answer. Some suggest drought, others disease, or conflict with neighboring groups. The ruins bear no marks of burning, no toppled walls of conquest. Instead, the departure feels deliberate, as though the people left quietly, carrying their belongings but leaving the tablets in place, too sacred or too dangerous to destroy. What survives is the sense of intention. The stones were not random markers. They were shaped, set, carved, and arranged with care. Whoever made them believed in their purpose enough to leave them behind, perhaps trusting that others centuries later would come to listen. Now, centuries after abandonment, you stand here listening. The city is silent, yes, but it is not empty. The slabs rise around you like watchers, their lines catching the pale light of the moon. You walk among them slowly, each step echoing softly on the hard earth. You run your hand once more across a tablet, feeling the etched grooves beneath your fingertips. And though you hear no clear words, you sense the weight of memory, a story pressed into stone, waiting. Perhaps the city was never meant to be explained fully. Perhaps its silence is the message itself, that voices fade, but presence endures. That even without language, stone holds its own form of communication, deep and wordless, speaking through time. As the night deepens, you linger a little longer, then turn to leave. Behind you the tablets stand immovable, their carved lines catching shadows. They remain as they always have, unreadable, mysterious, endlessly patient. Whether they truly speak or not is left to those who dare to stand in their company and listen. And so the silent city waits, high in the Peruvian mountains, its talking tablets poised in eternal conversation with the wind, holding secrets that may never be unlocked, and yet somehow are already being spoken, quietly, endlessly, to anyone who chooses to hear. The Library of Timbuktu's Hidden Manuscripts. The story begins in the heart of West Africa, where the desert stretches endlessly, its sands shifting with the wind like the turning of ancient pages. For centuries, the Sahara has been seen as a barrier, vast, harsh, and unforgiving. Yet it was across this very desert that caravans once carried treasures, not of gold, not of jewels, but of words. Words bound in leather, words written carefully by hand in ink that has survived longer than kingdoms. Words that told of medicine, astronomy, mathematics, poetry, philosophy, and law. These were the manuscripts of Timbuktu, a city that became a living library at the edge of the desert. Timbuktu, a name that, for many today, floats somewhere between reality and myth. Often used to mean a place impossibly far away, a nowhere at the edge of the world. But once it was the center of knowledge in Africa, a city where scholars gathered, where the sound of teaching echoed across courtyards, and where books were considered more valuable than gold itself. And within its mud-brick walls and winding alleys, thousands of manuscripts were hidden, preserved and protected from the sands of time. They would become one of humanity's greatest collections of wisdom, tucked away in the desert where few thought to look. The origins of Timbuktu's libraries begin in the 14th and 15th centuries, when the city became a vibrant hub of the trans-Saharan trade. Camel caravans stretched for miles across the dunes, carrying salt, ivory, and slaves, but also carrying ideas. Scholars traveled from North Africa, from Egypt, from Morocco, and from far beyond, to settle in this small city along the Niger River. Timbuktu blossomed under the Mali Empire, and later under the Songhai. At its height, it was said that more than 25,000 students studied in its schools, which were linked to its great mosques. The manuscripts came from everywhere. Some were copied painstakingly by hand from older works brought from Cairo or Cordoba. Others were written fresh by scholars of Timbuktu itself. The subjects they covered were astonishingly wide. Law and theology, yes, but also medicine that spoke of treating fevers and broken bones, astronomy that charted the stars, the phases of the moon, and the movements of planets, even mathematics and geometry used in surveying and architecture, poetry filled with metaphor and allegory, stories written in the flowing Arabic script, decorated sometimes with patterns or colored inks. Each manuscript was more than just words. It was a piece of a civilization that valued knowledge above all, but the desert is never still. Empires fell, rulers changed, and armies came. In 1591, the Moroccan invasion shattered the Songhai Empire, and with it, Timbuktu's golden age. Scholars were exiled or executed. Many manuscripts were burned, stolen, or left to rot. Yet even in this chaos, the people of Timbuktu understood the value of what they held. Families hid manuscripts in chests, buried them under the earth, or tucked them into the walls of houses made of mud. For centuries, the knowledge of Timbuktu was not preserved by institutions or rulers, but by ordinary people who guarded their manuscripts like treasures. Imagine the scene: a scholar's descendant, living in a modest mud brick house centuries later, still keeping a trunk of leather-bound manuscripts passed down through generations. Perhaps they did not always understand the contents, perhaps the ink had begun to fade, the pages to crumble, yet they held on. Quietly, stubbornly, they preserved them. Without this devotion, the manuscripts of Timbuktu might have been lost forever. In the 20th century, as explorers, historians, and archaeologists began to rediscover Timbuktu's scholarly past, the hidden manuscripts began to surface. Libraries like the Ahmed Baba Institute were established to collect and conserve them. What emerged was staggering: hundreds of thousands of manuscripts spread across private collections and family holdings. Some estimates suggest that more than 700,000 manuscripts have survived. An ocean of knowledge resting in the desert. Yet the manuscripts are fragile. The desert climate helps, its dryness slowing decay, but insects, sand, and time always threaten them. Some have been damaged beyond repair. Others remain locked away in families who still fear they could be stolen. The effort to preserve Timbuktu's manuscripts has become a race against time. Scholars and conservators have worked tirelessly to digitize them, to record every page so the wisdom they hold can be preserved even if the physical copy crumbles. The stories within the manuscripts are as remarkable as their survival. One manuscript describes a surgical procedure for removing cataracts from the eye, using methods surprisingly advanced for its time. Another details astronomical charts that help scholars predict eclipses. Some contain philosophical reflections on justice and governance, questioning the very nature of power. Others are filled with poetry, verses celebrating love, friendship, and faith, each written in careful calligraphy by a hand long gone. Then there are the manuscripts that tell of trade, records of business agreements, contracts, and correspondence. They paint a picture of Timbuktu, not only as a center of knowledge, but as a thriving city of merchants, where the desert itself became a highway of exchange. To read them is to step into the past, to hear the voices of merchants bargaining, scholars debating, poets composing. But perhaps the most remarkable story came in our own time, when Timbuktu once again faced destruction. In 2012, armed groups seized control of northern Mali. The world watched as ancient mausoleums and mosques in Timbuktu were attacked and destroyed. Fears grew that the manuscripts, this vast library of human knowledge, would be burned. Yet once again, the people of Timbuktu acted. In a secret effort, thousands of manuscripts were smuggled out of the city, hidden in metal trunks, loaded onto carts and boats, carried quietly to safer places in Bamako, hundreds of kilometers away. This rescue mission, carried out by librarians, archivists, and ordinary citizens, saved an estimated 350,000 manuscripts from destruction. They risked everything for books, for words, for the fragile record of their ancestors' minds. Today, the manuscripts of Timbuktu remain both vulnerable and alive. Efforts continue to restore them, to digitize them, to study them, and each time a page is turned, something astonishing is revealed. They remind us that Africa was never a silent continent, never a place without writing or thought, as outsiders once claimed. It was a place of scholarship, of debate, of curiosity. Timbuktu's manuscripts stand as proof. And so, when one imagines Timbuktu, not as a faraway nowhere, but as it truly was, the image becomes clearer. A city of mud brick mosques rising against the desert sky, the low hum of voices in courtyards where students debated the meaning of a text, the scratching of a reed pen on parchment, the scent of leather bindings stored carefully in trunks, the sound of caravans arriving, bells on camels jingling as goods and books alike were unloaded. A place where the desert carried not only salt and gold but knowledge itself. The manuscripts of Timbuktu endure because people believed they mattered. For over 6 centuries they were written, read, hidden, saved, smuggled, and now, slowly, shared again with the world. They are not just relics of the past, they are voices that still whisper across the sands, across time, carrying wisdom that outlasts empires. And somewhere, in a quiet room in Mali, a conservator opens a trunk, carefully lifts a manuscript bound in centuries-old leather, and begins to turn its pages. The words, written long ago under the desert sun, still speak. They speak of medicine, of stars, of justice, of love. They speak of Timbuktu, a city once forgotten, yet never silent. The Iceman who kept his tools close. High in the Alps, where the mountains rise like frozen teeth into the sky, a secret slept under layers of ice. For thousands of years, storms had buried it deeper, snow after snow, winter after winter, until the secret became part of the mountain itself. No one living knew it was there, and no one could imagine what the ice had preserved so carefully. But one late September day in 1991, two hikers on the Italian-Austrian border stumbled across something extraordinary: the body of a man, lying face down, his skin weathered like ancient parchment, his clothes in tatters, and beside him, tools and weapons that had once belonged to him, frozen in the moment he had last lived. He would come to be known simply as Otzi, the Iceman. His story is not just about his death, but about his life, and tonight, we walk quietly into that life, tracing the outlines of his world, his tools, his food, and his final journey through the snow. The Alps in the Copper Age were both home and hazard. Imagine standing where Otzi once stood. The sky is sharp and blue, the peaks jagged, the valleys below green and wooded. Villages were scattered far apart, made of timber and stone, where families farmed barley, herded goats, and worked copper into new shapes. Life was simple, but it was not easy. Winters were long and cruel, and every tool mattered. And this is why the discovery of Otzi was so astonishing. He had carried his world with him. His clothing was layered, practical, stitched together from goat and sheep hides, woven grasses and deerskin. On his feet were shoes stuffed with hay for warmth, bound with leather thongs to keep out the snow. He wore a cloak of woven grasses, like a cape, that kept off wind and rain. Each piece spoke of a life lived close to the earth, crafted by hands that knew the value of every fiber. But it was his tools that drew the deepest fascination. Next to his body lay a copper axe, gleaming even after 5 millennia. Its blade was carefully cast and hammered, hafted to a sturdy U-handle with birch tar and leather straps. To us, it was a relic. To him, it was survival. An axe could fell wood for shelter, butcher animals, defend against enemies. This single object told scholars that Otzi had lived at the dawn of the Copper Age, a time when stone was giving way to metal. In his pouch, carefully carried, were flint blades, a bone awl, and pieces of pyrite and flint for starting fire. Every tool had a place. Every tool was kept close. He also carried a quiver with unfinished arrows, their shafts smoothed, their tips not yet set. Alongside them was a bow taller than he was, made of yew, left unstrung. Why had he been carrying a bow not ready for use? Was it newly made? Was he repairing it? Or had he been interrupted before he could finish his work? These questions added to the mystery, but what was clear is that Otzi lived in a world where hunting was not just skill, but necessity. As researchers studied his remains, they realized he had not been wandering empty-handed. In a small birch bark container stitched neatly together, he had stored glowing embers wrapped in maple leaves and charcoal. These embers were his traveling fire. At any point he could coax them back into flame, warming himself or cooking food without struggling to strike sparks from stone. Imagine carrying fire with you through the mountains, protected like a fragile treasure, a reminder that warmth was never far. What makes Otzi unique is that his life is written in his body itself. His teeth, worn down to stubs, told of years of chewing coarse bread ground from stone-milled grain. His bones carried the stress of long walking over steep ground, his joints marked by arthritis, his skin etched with more than 60 tattoos. These tattoos were not decoration but lines and crosses along joints and muscle groups, almost like a map of pain. Some believe they were part of an early form of acupuncture, a treatment for the aches of his weary body. It means that 5,000 years ago, people were already trying to ease suffering through patterns on skin, and then there was his last meal. In his stomach were traces of ibex meat, red deer, einkorn wheat, and herbs. He had eaten well not long before he died. Some of the meat was cooked, some dried, carried as rations for the mountains. To carry food, to carry fire, to carry tools. This was how one survived in Otzi's world, but survival was not always guaranteed. When scientists scanned his body, they found an arrowhead lodged deep in his shoulder, near a major artery. It was the wound that killed him, a silent strike in the mountains. Perhaps he had been ambushed, perhaps he had fled from enemies. Perhaps the tools by his side were the last things he reached for. We do not know the story of that final moment, only that the mountains kept it hidden until the modern world was ready to find him. Still, the ice did more than preserve his death. It preserved the texture of his days. Imagine Otzi walking the valleys, the weight of his bow on his back, the axe swinging at his side, the pouch of flint in his belt. Each tool was not just an object, but an extension of himself. The axe meant security. The flint blades meant sharp edges for cutting hides or carving wood. The embers in birch bark meant life could be kindled again with a breath. To keep his tools close was to keep his world within reach. The Alps that watched him die were the same Alps that kept him safe for 5,000 years. Wind howled over snowdrifts, ice crept into valleys. Seasons passed, centuries turned to millennia, and still the body lay where it fell, untouched, unseen. Shepherds walked below, traders crossed the passes, armies marched, borders shifted, but the Iceman slept on, a secret between rock and ice. When his body was finally found, it was not at first treated as ancient. Hikers thought he might be a modern mountaineer lost in the snow. But as archaeologists arrived, the truth emerged. This was no ordinary body. This was a man from 3300 BCE. His copper axe was older than the pyramids of Egypt. His shoes were designed with such care they could walk across centuries. He was not just a frozen corpse, he was a time traveler, carrying the memory of his people into the present. And yet, even now, mysteries linger. Why was he alone in the mountains? Was he fleeing, or traveling, or hiding? The arrow wound suggests violence, perhaps betrayal. The unfinished arrows suggest he was in the middle of something, craft, preparation, that he never completed. His tattoos, his tools, his last meal, all are pieces of a story we try to piece together, but beyond the details there is something profoundly human in Ötzi's remains. He was not a king, not a warrior of legend, not a figure sung in epic poems. He was one man, living as best he could, keeping his tools close, carrying fire, walking the paths of the mountains. His story is not about glory, but about endurance. It is about how ordinary lives, lived quietly, can echo across time when preserved by chance. Think of him now, not as a body in a museum case, but as a man you could have met on a mountain path long ago. His cloak pulled tight against the wind, his axe gleaming at his side, his pouch of fire embers tucked away. He might have greeted you with a nod, or passed silently, intent on his journey. And just like that, he would have disappeared into the snow. Yet the snow did not erase him, it held him, waiting, so that 5,000 years later, we might see him again. The Iceman who kept his tools close reminds us that survival is made of small things. A well-tied shoe, a sharp blade, a pouch of fire, and it reminds us that every life, no matter how ordinary it seems, carries within it a story worth remembering. So the next time you picture the Alps, picture him too, the solitary figure moving through the white silence, every step careful, every tool trusted, every breath visible in the cold air. A man whose journey ended, but whose memory endures, kept safe in the ice until the world was ready to listen. The crystal cave that glistened with secrets. There is a cave in the north of Mexico that does not resemble the caverns you may know from stories of stalactites and underground rivers. This one is stranger, grander, more otherworldly. Hidden beneath the dusty surface of the desert near the town of Nika lies a chamber that seems less like something carved by nature and more like something imagined in a dream. Its walls are alive with crystals, giant, luminous beams of gypsum, some as thick as tree trunks and longer than a bus, stretching across the chamber in every direction. They crisscross like frozen lightning bolts, glowing faintly in the dim light, their surfaces smooth, milky, and glass-like. Stepping inside is like stepping into the ribcage of a slumbering giant made of light. The air is heavy, scorching and damp, and yet for the few who have entered, the feeling is one of being inside a sacred place. The cave was not meant to be found by human hands. For most of its existence, it lay sealed beneath layers of rock, filled with mineral-rich water, where for 500,000 years the crystals slowly grew. It was only in the year 2000, when miners digging deep into the earth for silver and lead broke through, that its secrets were revealed. When they first opened a path into the cavern, the men were struck silent by what they saw. Never had human eyes rested on such colossal crystals, each one like a shard of a fallen star. The place quickly became known as the Cave of Crystals, or La Cueva de los Cristales. Yet its scientific name only hints at its strangeness. In truth, it is one of the rarest natural wonders on Earth. A geological cathedral, created by the patience of time, and the quiet work of water and stone. Imagine the first steps taken into the cave. The air inside was unbearably hot, reaching nearly 60 degrees Celsius, with humidity so thick it clung to the lungs. Without protective suits and cooling systems, a person could not last more than 10 minutes before collapsing. And yet, in those short minutes, the sight was enough to leave an impression that could never be erased. The crystals themselves seem alive. Some stretch across the chamber diagonally, intersecting with others to form great lattices. Some emerge from the floor like jagged tusks. Others hang from the ceiling like suspended beams of ice. They are pale, milky, yet with a transparency that allows light to seep into their depths. Walking between them, one feels dwarfed, reduced to the scale of an insect moving through a frozen forest. The silence is total, broken only by the sound of one's own breath, labored and shallow in the punishing heat. Scientists who studied the cave found that these crystals were not simply remarkable in size, but in age. Each one took hundreds of thousands of years to form, growing slowly as mineral-rich water seeped into the chamber and evaporated, leaving gypsum behind. Over time, as the conditions remained stable, constant heat, constant humidity, the crystals grew larger and larger until they reached the size we see today. But beyond their beauty, the crystals carried secrets. Trapped inside some of them, scientists discovered tiny pockets of liquid, like ancient time capsules sealed away by the earth. Within those pockets were microorganisms, some dormant, perhaps millions of years old, waiting in silence. If they could be revived, it would mean life had endured in isolation, preserved inside crystals that had never been touched by the surface world. To stand inside the cave was to stand in a place where time itself seemed suspended. Every surface glimmered faintly, and the reflections made it difficult to judge distance. One crystal might seem close enough to touch, only to reveal itself meters away. The sense of orientation slipped, and one could almost imagine being inside some vast prism, light bending and folding across its surfaces. It is said that in ancient times, long before the cave was ever discovered, the local people of the region, the Ra-Amuri, and others, spoke of spirits living in the mountains. To them the land itself was alive, breathing, shaping itself slowly. Though they could not have known of the cavern below, their reverence for the mountains feels fitting. If they had stepped inside the cave, perhaps they would have thought they had entered the very bones of the earth, where giants rested and the light of creation had been trapped. The miners who first discovered the cave could not stay long inside. Without suits of ice water circulation, without respirators, they quickly grew dizzy and disoriented. Some nearly collapsed on their first entry. The danger was real, for the cave was not meant for human life. And yet, drawn by curiosity, scientists devised ways to study it, constructing special cooling gear, measuring the crystals, and attempting to understand how such a marvel had come to be. Over time, they learned that the cave's conditions were as fragile as they were unique. Once the mining pumps that had kept the cavern drained of water were shut off, the chamber would begin to fill again. Without the pumps, the cave would vanish beneath the flood, returning to the state in which it had grown. And so, as quickly as it had been revealed, the cave of crystals began to retreat once more into secrecy, its glistening beams hidden beneath the rising waters. Today, the cave is closed. Few have ever seen it, and fewer still will ever enter again. Its wonders rest in darkness, concealed from human eyes, preserved by the very forces that created it. Yet in photographs and in stories, the cave lives on, a reminder that the earth holds mysteries beyond our imagining, that beneath the dust and stone lie worlds of unimaginable beauty. Close your eyes and picture it. The desert above is silent, the sun burning hot over the barren landscape. But far beneath your feet, in a cavern carved by time and patience, lie the glowing bones of the world, crystals longer than trees, smoother than glass, luminous in the dimness. Imagine walking among them, your breath shallow, the air pressing in, every surface gleaming like frozen light. The silence is so deep it feels like it has waited forever, and in a sense it has. For 500,000 years the cave lay in stillness, building its cathedral of crystal, preparing for a brief moment when humans would stumble upon it, glimpse its wonders, and then leave it to its slumber once again. The Cave of Crystals at Neka is a reminder that not all treasures are meant to be taken, not all secrets are meant to be unlocked. Some exist simply to be marveled at, even if only for a moment. It is as if the earth allowed us a glimpse into its hidden heart, before closing the doors once more, returning the crystals to darkness and silence. In the end, the cave is still there, waiting beneath the mountain, its giant beams glistening in the blackness, untouched, unseen, yet eternal. And perhaps that is where its true power lies. Not in being possessed or studied endlessly, but in remaining a dream half remembered, a legend half believed, a cathedral of crystal that glistens forever in the memory of those who dare to imagine it. The Oracle's whispering chamber of Delphi. High in the folds of Mount Parnassus, where the stone ridges ripple like frozen waves and the olive trees grow silver under the Aegean sun, there lies a place that once spoke with the voice of the gods. Pilgrims came from every corner of the ancient world, their sandals worn thin from dusty miles, their minds burdened with questions they could not answer alone. Kingdoms shifted their course, battles were delayed or hastened. Even the birth of empires seemed to tremble before this place. They came to Delphi, and at Delphi they entered the whispering chamber of the Oracle. It was not a palace, not a tower of gold or shining marble at first. It began with a cleft in the rock, a natural wound in the mountainside, where steam and strange scents drifted up from the earth. The early shepherds of Phocis, so the story goes, first noticed goats who wandered near the fissure, behaving strangely, stumbling, bleeding as though possessed, eyes rolling with visions unseen. When men drew close, the same enchantment fell upon them, a trembling of limbs, a sudden flood of strange images and voices in the mind. The place was sacred, they declared. The earth itself was speaking. In time, the Greeks built around it a sanctuary. Stone by stone, they carved terraces into the slope, erected columned temples, and paved a sacred way that wound upward in serpent-like coils. Each step carried a pilgrim closer to the hidden chamber, to the god Apollo, who was said to dwell here after slaying the serpent python whose carcass was left to rot beneath the ground. And beneath the gleaming temple, at the heart of it all, was the chamber where a woman sat upon a tripod above the fissure, breathing the rising vapors, and became something more than mortal. The Pythia, they called her. She was no ordinary woman, though outwardly she seemed one. Chosen not for beauty or for wealth, but for purity of spirit and readiness to surrender her own voice to another. She bathed in the Castalian spring before entering the temple, the cold mountain water running over her skin, washing away all earthly dust. Laurel leaves, sacred to Apollo, she chewed, their bitterness a reminder of the god's touch. Then she descended to the darkened adytum, the inner sanctum beneath the temple floor, where she sat in silence until the vapors swirled and her body trembled with the divine. The chamber itself was small, enclosed in stone. Its air was heavy, carrying a scent of earth and resin, sometimes sweet, sometimes metallic. The walls seemed to pulse with sound, as though the mountain itself exhaled. When the moment came, the Pythia's lips would part, and words would pour forth, not in neat measured sentences, but in rushing streams of syllables, riddles, and fragments. The priests who stood nearby leaned in close, straining to catch her utterances, writing them down, shaping them into verses of prophecy. Yet even shaped into poetry, they retained their enigmatic form, answers that could cut two ways, guidance that could lead as easily to ruin as to triumph. Consider the kings and generals who came here. Croesus of Lydia, rich beyond reckoning, laid gifts of gold at Apollo's feet and asked if he should wage war against Persia. If you cross the river, the oracle replied, a great empire will fall. Emboldened, Croesus marched, only to find that it was his own empire that crumbled. Another ruler asked if he would defeat Athens. The oracle answered that he would meet a great army. He did, but not as a victor, only as prey. Always the chamber whispered, but never with the certainty mortals craved. Yet for all its riddles, Delphi endured. Century after century, travelers arrived, bringing tokens and treasures, carving their dedications into marble walls. The sacred way gleamed with offerings, bronze tripods, statues of lions and sphinxes, treasures from distant lands. To climb that path was to walk through a forest of stone and metal, each gift a fragment of a prayer, each monument a fragment of human longing. At the summit, the temple waited, bright against the mountain sky, its columns lifting like a song, but it was beneath, always beneath, that the true mystery lingered. The whispering chamber, hidden from the sun, kept its secrets in shadows. Modern scholars have argued over the nature of its power. Was it the breath of Apollo, or the exhalation of the earth? Some point to geological fissures, to gases rising from the stone, ethylene or methane, invisible, intoxicating, seeping into the lungs of the oracle, until her mind slipped into altered states. Others suggest no vapors at all, only the weight of ritual, the dim chamber, the chanting of priests, enough to bring a woman into trance. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it was neither. The whispers were real, and that was enough. Even now, if you walk among the ruins of Delphi, you can trace the path pilgrims once took. The theater still arcs against the hillside, its seats rising tier upon tier, where plays and hymns once echoed. The stadium lies higher still, where athletes raced in honor of the god, and the temple itself, though broken, still holds the air of reverence. Stand at its edge, and gaze down toward the Pleistos Valley, where olive groves ripple like a green sea. The silence is deep, but listen closely, and you may imagine a faint murmur rising from beneath your feet, a memory of voices that once shook kings. Legends say that Delphi was the navel of the world, the omphalos, the center from which all knowledge radiated. A carved stone, rounded and marked with a net-like pattern, was set within the sanctuary as a symbol of that belief. To kneel before it was to place oneself at the heart of creation, and to enter the chamber below was to brush against forces older than kingdoms, older than gods themselves. As centuries passed, the world shifted. New empires rose, new faiths took hold. The Roman emperors sought Delphi's counsel, but time eroded the sanctuary's power. Earthquakes shook the temple, fires blackened the walls. Finally, with the coming of Christianity, the oracle's voice was silenced, declared pagan, and cast aside. The chamber fell into stillness. The fissure closed, the vapors ceased, and the whispering mouth of the mountain was sealed. And yet, the aura lingers. The stones still carry the weight of countless footsteps, the echoes of questions once whispered with trembling lips. Questions of love, of war, of fate. The chamber may be quiet, but the human desire that built it has not vanished. Even now, we long for answers from beyond ourselves, for a voice that can guide us when all roads are clouded. If you close your eyes and let the wind of Mount Parnassus brush against your cheek, if you breathe deeply of the thyme and the resin that still perfume the air, you might catch it, the faintest impression of a whisper. A voice older than language, softer than memory, the voice of the oracle, carried on the mountain's breath, reminding us that beneath stone and silence, the earth still speaks. The lost pyramids beneath the sand dunes. Imagine for a moment that the sands of the desert are not still. They shift, they roll, and they bury. The wind never rests, and with each grain that moves, stories are hidden. Stories of kingdoms, of people, of monuments once bright under the sun, now covered by centuries of drifting dunes. In Sudan, just beyond the Nile, there is such a place where pyramids rise, not as tall as those in Egypt, and not as widely known, but pyramids nonetheless, many of them scattered in silence. Some lean, some broken, some nearly erased by time. Yet beneath the sand, beneath layers of forgotten dust, more still remain, waiting for the world to remember them. Welcome to the story of the lost pyramids beneath the dunes. Before we begin, take a moment, settle where you are, breathe slowly, and let the desert stretch out before your mind's eye, endless, golden, and calm. The horizon shimmers with heat, the sky holds no cloud, and there, hidden just beyond sight, is a mystery that has lasted for thousands of years. When people hear the word pyramid, their thoughts almost always go north, to Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the Sphinx, the long line of pharaohs who commanded monuments built to last forever. But the Nile is long, and kingdoms flourished, not only in Egypt but far to the south, where today's Sudan stretches wide. Here a kingdom once rose, Kush. Its people, the Nubians, were masters of the river and the desert, and just as the Egyptians had done, they built pyramids, not one or two, but hundreds. In fact, Sudan holds more pyramids than Egypt itself, yet they are different, smaller, steeper, clustered close together. Their shapes cast sharp shadows when the sun rises, and when the moon glows full, they shine pale against the desert. But many of them, over time, have been swallowed by sand. Some are visible only at their tips, some lie completely hidden, as though the earth itself has folded over them. Imagine walking there, in silence. Your feet sink into soft sand, every step a quiet press into history. The wind whistles lightly, brushing against your skin, and the dunes ripple like waves. The land is almost empty, yet you know that beneath the surface, it is crowded with tombs, chambers, carvings, treasures, and stories. The pyramids of Sudan belong mostly to the kingdom of Kush, which thrived between about 800 BC and 300 AD. They built their capital at places like Napata and later Meroe. These cities, now mostly ruins, once bustled with palaces, temples, and markets. The kings and queens of Kush ruled wide lands, traded gold, ivory, and incense, and even challenged the power of Egypt itself. And in their death, they sought pyramids, monuments to carry them into the afterlife. Close your eyes and picture one such pyramid, hidden beneath a dune. For centuries, no one has seen it. The sand has piled so high that even its peak is invisible. But within it, the air is still, the chambers dark, the walls carved with images of gods and symbols of life. Perhaps a queen rests there, surrounded by jewelry, amulets, and offerings. Perhaps a king lies in silence, wrapped in linen, guarded by painted figures that line the walls. Outside, the desert forgets. Inside, the pyramid remembers. For many years, these pyramids remained hidden, lost beneath the shifting dunes. Travelers passed near them without knowing. Only locals, perhaps, whispered of stones buried in sand, of pointed shapes glimpsed after storms. When the wind uncovered what it had long concealed, then came explorers. Some European travelers of the 18th and 19th centuries stumbled upon these strange, steep pyramids. Unlike Egypt's massive monuments, these were smaller, clustered, almost delicate, yet they were no less magnificent, for their number was astonishing. At Meroe alone, more than 200 pyramids rise. Some lean at angles, their bricks crumbling. Others stand proud, sharp against the horizon, and beyond those others still remain lost, their exact locations swallowed by dunes. The sand is not an enemy, but a keeper. It erases and protects all at once. Without the dunes, perhaps these pyramids would have been broken apart, their stones taken, their treasures stolen, but with the sand covering them, they sleep. And even now, archaeologists uncover them slowly, carefully brushing away what the desert has hidden. One can imagine the moment, a faint outline seen where the dune dips, a hint of stone, the top of a pyramid just breaking through. Work begins, the sand is cleared, and slowly, brick by brick, the pyramid re-emerges, as though rising once more from the earth. But what do they hold? What stories wait within? Inscriptions in these pyramids often show a blending of cultures. Egyptian gods appear, Isis, Osiris, Amun, yet alongside them are Nubian deities, local symbols of the desert and the river. The art is detailed yet distinct, showing a kingdom that was both connected to Egypt and proudly its own. Many pyramids contain chapels in front, small temples where offerings were made. Their walls are carved with images of kings receiving life from the gods, queens adorned in long robes, and priests carrying gifts. It is as if the pyramids were not only tombs but also gateways, places where the living and the divine could meet. The mystery deepens with what is still hidden. For every pyramid uncovered, there are others we know of only through fragments, through ancient writings, or through faint traces seen from above. Beneath the dunes of Sudan lie entire chapters of history not yet told. Archaeologists sometimes use satellites, scanning the desert for shapes too regular to be natural. Straight lines, sharp angles, rectangles buried beneath sand. These marks suggest more pyramids, more temples, waiting just below. Each one could change what we know about the Nubian kingdom, its rulers, and its people. And then there are the unanswered questions. Why did the Kushites build so many pyramids, even after Egypt had mostly stopped? Why were they steeper, narrower, almost reaching up in sharp lines rather than spreading wide like the Giza monuments? And why, in time, did they stop building them? Some say the sands grew harsher, trade routes shifted, kingdoms fell, but the pyramids remained, quiet witnesses to centuries of change. Picture this again, the desert at dusk. The sun dips low, painting the sky with fire. The sand cools from gold to shadow. And there, breaking the line of the horizon, are peaks, pyramid peaks, sharp and silent. Some rise above the dunes, others lie just beneath, their presence marked only by a ripple in the sand. It is a haunting sight, both beautiful and lonely. The pyramids are here, yet not fully here, caught between memory and forgetting. In recent years, efforts have been made to protect them. Archaeologists carefully document, restore, and guard against erosion. But the desert is endless, and the dunes never rest. For every pyramid uncovered, another may vanish again, swallowed by drifting sand. Perhaps that is fitting, for the pyramids of Sudan were never meant for crowds or constant gaze. They were built as eternal homes for kings and queens, as sacred places where life met death and the divine. And so they remain, eternal, whether hidden or revealed. As you sit now, let yourself drift with the dunes. Feel the slow passage of time, the quiet covering of centuries. The pyramids stand, whether seen or unseen. The kings and queens rest, their names carved in stone, their memory preserved not only in books or museums but in the very sand itself. And the desert continues, endless and patient, covering, uncovering, remembering, forgetting, holding within it the lost pyramids beneath the dunes. The stone serpent that guarded a forgotten city. Beneath the heavy green breath of the Cambodian jungle lies a city that once hummed with life. Its streets crowded with merchants, pilgrims, kings, and commoners alike. Today, only silence moves there, broken by the slow creak of trees shifting in the wind and the occasional cry of a bird circling above. Stone blocks lie scattered like bones of a giant, softened by moss and vines, and hidden among these fragments is a serpent, carved not of flesh or scale but of stone. It coils in long, patient arcs, winding along crumbling causeways, arching across forgotten bridges, stretching toward temple gates where it seems to guard the threshold between the human and the divine. For centuries, this serpent has kept its silent watch. Some say it was more than mere decoration, more than stone, that it was a guardian, not just of a city, but of its memory, its secrets and the lives once lived beneath its shadow. Welcome to Cambodia. Welcome to a forgotten city. Welcome to the serpent that never left its post. The city we are speaking of is Angkor, though the serpent you may see could belong to many corners of its vast sprawl. Angkor was not just a city, but a constellation of them. Palaces and temples rose across a stretch of land so wide it could swallow Paris, London, and Rome together and still have space for fields, reservoirs, and the great jungle that pressed against its edge. At its heart was Angkor Wat, the great temple, vast as a mountain of stone. Yet scattered all around were temples, lesser in size but not in wonder, each adorned with carvings of gods, demons, kings, dancers, and serpents. The serpent in Cambodian legend was no ordinary creature. It was the Naga, a divine being, half serpent, sometimes half human, a bridge between earth and the heavens. In the myths of Cambodia, it is said that the Khmer people themselves are descended from the union of a Naga princess and an Indian prince. This meant that serpents were not merely guardians, they were ancestors, protectors of the land itself. And so, on the great causeways that stretched like stone ribbons across moats and reservoirs, sculptors carved endless rows of Nagas. Their long bodies undulated in stone, and rows of warriors or gods could be seen grasping the serpent's body, as though to pull it in a cosmic tug-of-war. These carvings recalled one of the greatest myths of Hindu belief, the churning of the ocean of milk. In that story, gods and demons alike grasp a serpent, twisting it back and forth around a mountain set in the ocean, to churn out the nectar of immortality. The serpent becomes a rope. The world itself becomes the vessel, and time becomes the rhythm of the pulling. Imagine walking across one of these bridges long ago. The air thick with the smell of damp stone and flowers. The reflection of a temple shimmering in the water beside you. On either side of the bridge, stone figures taller than a man haul on the coiled body of the serpent. Their faces, calm, fierce, divine, seem to stare across centuries. The serpent arches its hooded head at the gate, waiting as though it alone could decide whether you might pass. But to stand here now, centuries later, is to feel the quiet weight of abandonment. For Angkor was left behind. Its people moved, its kings fell, its waters dried, and yet the serpent remained, watching, waiting. To understand why the serpent endures, we must step into the rhythm of Angkor itself. This was not a city like those of Europe or China, bound by walls and stone roads. Angkor was a water city, a city of reservoirs, canals, and moats, spread out over forests and fields. The kings of Angkor mastered water like others mastered stone or bronze. They carved not just temples but entire landscapes, holding back floods, channeling rivers, feeding rice fields that could sustain an empire. And so the serpent too may be seen as a symbol of this mastery. In Cambodian lore, Nagas are linked to water. They dwell in rivers, in lakes, in the sea. They are rainbringers, guardians of fertility. For a people who depended on rice, who depended on the careful cycle of floods and droughts, the serpent was no mere decoration. It was woven into the very idea of survival. As the centuries passed, kings rose and fell, and each left their mark. Some built temples that rivaled the heavens. Some left statues of themselves, larger than life. Others carved stories into stone walls that stretch for hundreds of feet. Battles, processions, scenes of daily life. And in so many of these stories, serpents are there. A hooded cobra fanning its stone hood behind a meditating Buddha. A great naga stretched across a balustrade, its scales lined in careful symmetry. A serpent coiled beneath the feet of a dancing god. What is remarkable is how these carvings endured when so much else did not. Wooden houses have rotted, clay tiles have shattered, even walls of sandstone have collapsed. But the serpent remains. Vines may crawl over it, roots may split its body, but its presence persists, like a whisper of the city that once was. For centuries after Angkor was abandoned, the jungle claimed it. Villagers nearby remembered fragments of stories, fragments of temples. Some visited to pray, others stayed away, fearing spirits. When Western explorers stumbled upon the ruins in the 19th century, they were astonished by the scale of the place. Giant faces smiled down from towers, trees grew out of broken walls, their roots like frozen rivers of wood, and always, on the bridges and gateways, serpents stretched their stone bodies, worn but unbroken. To these newcomers, the serpent was a puzzle. To the Khmer, it was memory. Let us walk then, along one of these ancient causeways, slowly, as though our footsteps will not disturb the silence. The serpent stretches along our path, its stone body smooth in some places, pitted and eroded in others. Its head rises at the gate, mouth slightly open as if caught mid-breath. We step across fallen blocks. The jungle hums around us. Light shifts in soft columns through the trees, and for a moment it feels as though the serpent still watches, still guards, still waits for its city to awaken. But Angkor will not return as it was. Its people have moved. Its waters have shifted. Its kings are long dust. What remains is this: stone, forest, and the serpent. There is one more story to tell. In Khmer myth, when a temple is abandoned, the spirits within do not vanish. They linger. Some take on the form of animals. Some become whispers in the trees. Some sink into the stone itself. Perhaps the serpent, carved so many times in so many places, is one such spirit. Not just a symbol, not just a carving, but a fragment of the city's soul, stretched across centuries, so that Angkor is never truly forgotten. The serpent does not move, and yet it does. Its body winds across bridges, causeways, moats, and gateways. Its scales are leaves, its breath is rain, its eyes are the endless patience of stone. It guards a city that has fallen silent, but in its silence, it speaks. And if you listen closely, if you let the rustle of leaves and the creak of branches fill the air, you may hear what it has guarded all along. Not treasure, not power, but memory. The memory of a people, of a city, of a world built in stone and water and faith. The serpent endures, and through it, the forgotten city is never truly lost. The bronze chariots, buried with an emperor. The earth held its breath when the burial mound of China's first emperor was raised. In the ancient heartland of Shanxi, where the fields ripple with wheat and the wind travels soft across yellow loess soil, there was once a construction unlike any other, a tomb so vast, so carefully arranged, that it carried into the earth not only treasures and weapons, but also entire scenes of life, crafted in silence for eternity. Among these buried wonders were chariots cast not in wood, not in iron, but in bronze, crafted with such delicacy, such detail, that time itself seemed reluctant to erode them. These bronze chariots lay beneath the soil for over 2,000 years, waiting for the day the world above might rediscover their stillness. Imagine walking across the gentle hills near Xi'an, where villages stand quietly, and the earth reveals little of its secrets. Below that ground stretches a mausoleum complex so enormous that even now, after decades of excavation, only parts of it have been touched. The Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who unified the warring states into one China, ordered his resting place to mirror his vision of empire, absolute, enduring, complete in every detail. Warriors stood in ranks of terracotta, their faces unique, their armor finely sculpted. Horses stood ready, sculpted in lifelike form, and not far from the great army, in pits carefully prepared, rested the bronze chariots. They were not simple wagons of war, they were works of art, statements of imperial power, designed to be both practical models and symbols of eternity. Crafted at half scale, these chariots measured nearly 4 feet in height, and more than 11 feet in length. They were formed from thousands of pieces, each carefully cast and assembled, their surfaces adorned with intricate designs, their bronze bodies painted once in brilliant colors. 4 bronze horses, bridled and fitted with ornaments, pulled each chariot. The harnesses were gilded, the wheels spun with the suggestion of motion, as though waiting for a silent command to roll forward once more. Archaeologists uncovered them in the 1970s, when excavations near the Emperor's Mound revealed the pits. The sight was staggering. After so many centuries, the bronze had darkened, the paints had faded, yet the forms were unmistakable. The first chariot appeared in fragments, shattered by the weight of soil above it. Painstakingly, conservators lifted each piece, brushed away the dust of centuries, and reassembled it like a great puzzle of antiquity. The second chariot emerged more intact, preserved in its shape, revealing what the first had lost. Together, they became windows into a past, where craftsmanship and imperial ambition met in shimmering bronze. The first chariot was an open carriage, thought to represent the vehicle an emperor might ride during inspections. Its canopy arched overhead, light but protective, shading the figure that would have stood inside. Its wheels were large, designed with precision, their spokes evenly set, their rims cast to balance strength with elegance. The 4 horses bridled side by side, held their heads in perpetual stillness. Their flared nostrils and sculpted muscles suggested life, as though frozen in the moment before a journey began. The second chariot differed. It was enclosed, a covered cart, offering shelter and privacy. Perhaps this symbolized the emperor's presence during travel, or a carriage for the spirit as it moved through the underworld. Its canopy stretched broad, like a small roof carried on wheels, its sides decorated with finely patterned designs. Within, a bronze figure once stood as charioteer, reins in hand. The detailing was extraordinary, tiny buckles, minuscule hinges, parts so precise they seemed the work of modern instruments, yet created by artisans more than 2 millennia ago. The choice of bronze itself was deliberate. Wood might rot, iron might rust, but bronze, carefully alloyed and worked, endures. Each component was cast separately: the wheels, the yokes, the ornaments, the weapons attached to the chariot's side. Then they were fitted together, piece by piece, until the whole structure stood ready. To imagine the hands that shaped them is to imagine patience stretched over months and years. Workers dedicated to creating something not for use in battle, not for the dust of roads but for eternity beneath the earth. The chariots were not alone in their silent company. Around them weapons lay buried, crossbows and swords, many still sharp when uncovered. Pottery vessels rested nearby. These pits formed part of a larger plan, for the mausoleum was arranged with cosmic care. Qin Shi Huang, in life, demanded the world be ordered to his command. In death, he required the same. Streams of mercury, legend said, were laid within the tomb chamber itself, to flow like rivers across a model of the empire. Above these unseen chambers, the emperor's bronze chariot stood guard, poised to carry him wherever he wished in the realm of spirits. The bronze horses are perhaps the most haunting. Each one was sculpted with care, their manes trimmed, their harnesses inlaid with gold and silver. Their ears tilt slightly forward, alert. Their mouths are open, as if breathing. The reins that stretch from their bridles connect back to the driver's hands, and though no human breath fills the space, the design suggests readiness, motion, command. They are not merely statues, they are companions, guardians, waiting for a master who no longer comes. For centuries, local farmers tilled the fields above, unaware of the treasures below. The earth pressed down on the chariots, but could not erase them. When they finally returned to light, the world marveled at their preservation. Scholars studied the alloys, discovering the mixture of copper and tin, sometimes with traces of lead, chosen for strength and sheen. They examined the pigments, finding remnants of reds, blues, and greens once painted on the surface. They traced the decorations, spirals, clouds, geometric patterns, symbols of rank and eternity. The chariots told stories without words. They revealed the skill of artisans who could craft on such a scale with such precision before the age of machines. They spoke of an emperor's vision, one so vast he commanded not only armies in life, but also armies of clay and bronze in death. They suggested a culture where death was not an end, but a continuation, an empire mirrored in the underworld, supplied with every necessity, every tool, every symbol of authority. To stand before them today, in the museum near Xi'an where they are displayed, is to feel both closeness and distance. They stand behind glass, their bronze gleaming under soft light, their silence deeper than words. Visitors move slowly, voices hushed, as if in the presence of something greater than time. The wheels no longer turn, the reins no longer pull, but the idea behind them remains powerful, that memory and material, once bound together, can outlast centuries. One can imagine the day they were lowered into their pit. Torches flickered in the night, casting long shadows across workers bent in careful labor. Ropes strained as the chariots were lowered, wheels secured, horses aligned. The emperor's officials stood nearby, recording the act, ensuring no detail was missed. Then earth began to fall, shovel by shovelful, until the bronze vanished from sight. Silence followed, and with it the long wait of centuries. The rediscovery did not break that silence, it only carried it into new ears. Archaeologists who brushed away the soil, listened with their eyes, piecing together what words could not convey. Each hinge, each rivet, each painted line told part of a larger story. And in that story, the bronze chariots remain not only artifacts, but symbols of a world where ambition reached for eternity, and in some ways, succeeded. The emperor's tomb itself remains unopened. Legends of Mercury rivers and hidden traps keep it sealed, for to disturb it too soon would risk losing what might still rest inside. But the chariots, standing guard outside the chamber, have already revealed the magnitude of what lies beneath. If models of such perfection were created for the approach, what wonders might still sleep in the darkness at the tomb's heart? The bronze chariots remind us of patience, of how the earth holds memory until it is ready to share it. They remind us of human hands, shaping with intention what they would never see again. Gifts to a ruler whose presence commanded obedience even in death. They remind us of continuity, how the desire for permanence has echoed across civilizations, whether in pyramids of stone, temples carved from rock, or in this case, bronze wheels waiting forever to turn. And so they remain, not in motion, but in stillness. The bronze does not rust, the horses do not falter, the reins do not break. Time moves, yet the chariots remain, poised at the edge of eternity, guardians of a dream, buried beneath the Chinese earth more than 2,000 years ago. The sun altar that measured the stars. High in the Andean highlands where the sky stretches vast and unbroken, and the air carries the thin crispness of altitude, there lies a plateau of stone that seems more ancient than memory. Here scattered across the ridges and valleys of Peru, one encounters monuments that do not simply stand upon the earth but appear as though they were carved out of it, coaxed from the living rock by hands that believed stone itself could hold the rhythm of the heavens. Among them is one altar, quiet and unmoving, yet whispering through time, the sun altar that measured the stars. It is not the largest of monuments, nor is it covered in the sweeping grandeur of massive pyramids. Instead, its majesty lies in its restraint, a carved platform of stone, rectangular yet softened by time, its edges worn smooth by centuries of wind. To those who first stumble upon it, it may appear little more than a block of weathered rock, set askew among ruins. But as the sun rises and shadows stretch across its carved surfaces, the stone comes alive. Its angles, its cuts, its deliberate notches, all respond to light in a dance too precise to be chance. The people who shaped this altar belonged to a civilization who gazed at the heavens not as distant stars, but as a woven tapestry directly tied to their survival. The Inca, like those before them, believed the cosmos was not separate from the earth but stitched into it. Crops sprouted by the calendar of constellations, festivals were marked by the position of the sun, and kings traced their divine authority from the sky itself. The sun altar was not merely a religious stage but a tool, an observatory of shadows. Imagine standing there centuries ago, the air still before dawn, the chill of mountain night lingering against your skin. A priest, wrapped in thick woolen cloth dyed with the deep red of cochineal, stands ready. In his hand he carries nothing but a small offering of maize kernels, shining faintly in the flickering torchlight. Behind him the people gather in silence, their faces turned toward the east. As the first rays of sunlight crest the jagged peaks, the altar comes to life. A thin shadow, drawn like ink upon stone, falls precisely into the groove carved for it. It is the solstice. The people breathe in awe. Time has been measured. The gods, once again, have revealed their will. The altar was not a solitary creation. It belonged to a network of sacred sites that together acted as a calendar stretched across the land. The Inca engineers understood geometry and perspective, embedding their temples with windows that caught the rising sun at specific times of year, aligning not merely with the horizon but with mountaintops that framed the sky. In this way, the mountains themselves became markers in their great cosmic clock, and the altar was the mechanism that translated those heavenly patterns into earthly rituals. Yet, even as the altar measured time, It embodied mystery, for carved into its flat top are shapes whose meaning scholars still debate. A series of depressions, shallow yet deliberate, perhaps once holding sacred liquids, water, chisha, or even blood, that reflected the sky above. When filled, they could transform the stone into a mirror, a double of the heavens. Looking into them, one might not see their own reflection, but the constellations flickering within. The Inca did not see the stars as points of light scattered randomly across the sky. They saw dark constellations, patterns not formed by brightness, but by the dark spaces between. In the Milky Way's band, they discerned animals familiar to their lives: the serpent, the llama, the fox. These figures were not distant fancies, but guardians, woven into their cycles of rain and fertility. And so the altar became a bridge, connecting sky and soil, eternity and season, divine order and human survival. Over centuries, the altar has endured not only the passing of time, but the gaze of those who sought to understand it. The Spanish, upon arriving in these lands, saw only a block of stone, an idol of a defeated people. They toppled temples, dismantled shrines, and razed churches upon sacred grounds. Yet the altar remained, perhaps overlooked, perhaps simply too immovable to discard. Its voice grew quiet, yet not silent. It waited beneath the sun, each year marking the same solstice, casting the same shadows, measuring time for those who still cared to look. Travelers in the modern age, stumbling upon its carved form, often find themselves struck not by grandeur, but by subtlety. There is no towering spire, no dramatic facade. Instead, the altar's strength lies in stillness, in the way light plays upon its surface. On equinox mornings, when shadows align just so, one feels a connection not merely with history, but with something deeper, something woven into the rhythms of Earth itself. Archaeologists have studied its cuts, measuring angles with instruments, tracing the grooves with careful fingers. Some suggest it was a throne of ceremony, others call it a sundial. Still others believe it was both, and more. A place where the practical and the spiritual intertwined so seamlessly that the distinction never mattered. To the Inca, to mark time was not only to organize the year, it was to honor the gods, to ensure the rains fell, to keep the world itself balanced. Imagine then the rituals performed here. Picture lines of dancers weaving around the stone, their steps rhythmic, echoing the heartbeat of the earth. Musicians play panpipes and drums, their sounds carrying across the valley. Priests raise their arms to the sky, chanting in Quechua, their voices blending with the whistle of the wind. At the center, the altar stands unmoving, indifferent, yet central to it all, a silent stone that turns the invisible movements of the cosmos into patterns felt on the ground. Time passed, empires fell, but the altar remained. Centuries later, farmers passing by still touched the stone for luck, leaving small offerings of coca leaves or corn. Children climbed upon it, their laughter echoing where once prayers had been whispered. The mountain winds carried both memory and forgetfulness, and so the altar lives between worlds, half a relic of the past, half an active participant in the present. What makes it haunting is not simply its age, nor even its survival, but its purpose. For the altar does not merely represent the past, it still functions. On solstice mornings, shadows fall just as they did centuries ago. The same grooves still catch the sun, still mark the day. The heavens have not changed, and the altar still listens. Even now, standing before it, one might feel the hum of time itself, steady, unbroken, flowing like water through stone. One cannot help but wonder about the minds that built it. Without compasses, telescopes, or written records, they read the sky with an intimacy modern instruments rarely provide. They noticed how stars shifted slowly over generations, how constellations rose at slightly different times each year. They embedded this knowledge into stone, trusting that what they carved would last longer than memory, and they were right. For the altar stands not only as a monument, but as a record, etched in granite, immune to fire, resistant to decay. The mysteries remain. Did priests once lay upon it, gazing upward, tracing constellations mirrored in bowls of water? Did they pour offerings into its depressions, watching liquid trickle along channels cut with precision? Did farmers gather here to learn when to plant and harvest, guided not by written calendars but by the altar's shadows? As night falls upon the high plateau, stars reappear in the black sky, clear and sharp in the thin mountain air. The Milky Way arches overhead like a river of light. To the Inca, this was not a metaphor, it was the Vilcanota River, mirrored in the heavens. They believed that everything on earth had its counterpart above, that the sky and ground were bound together. And here upon the sun altar, that bond becomes tangible. Standing before it today, one might place their hand upon the stone and feel the coolness of centuries. The grooves are shallow, yet they still hold meaning. The surface, worn smooth by weather, still answers to the sun. And though the voices of the priests are gone, the altar continues to whisper, through light, through shadow, through the quiet persistence of stone. The sun altar that measured the stars does not dazzle with spectacle. It does not rise high or gleam with gold. Instead, it teaches patience, silence, and attention. It reminds us that time is not only written in books or displayed on clocks, but also carved in shadow, traced in light, embedded in the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. And so it remains. High in Peru, cradled by mountains, open to the sky. A block of stone, yes, but also a window into eternity. A calendar that needs no words, no pages, only sun and shadow. A monument not to kings, but to the dialogue between earth and sky. And in its stillness, it continues to measure, not only the stars, but the very passage of human wonder across the ages. The great Zimbabwe walls, that spoke without mortar. The air of southern Africa has long carried whispers of stone. Not the stone of mountains that rise naturally, or of cliffs that weather away with time, but of stone arranged with human intent, stone piled into curving walls, rising higher than the eye might expect, holding a mystery that has endured for centuries. In the land now known as Zimbabwe, there rests a city of stone, whose very silence is its story. Great Zimbabwe, as it came to be called, was not built with mortar, yet its walls have held for nearly 1,000 years. They stretch and curve across the land, encircling enclosures and towers, standing as though the rock itself had decided to grow in deliberate human forms. To step among those walls today is to enter a kind of quiet that feels heavy with meaning. No one inscription explains what happened here. No ruler's name is carved into the granite, and yet the stones themselves seem to speak, if only one listens closely enough. The great enclosure, the hill complex, the valley ruins, each section carries its own weight of memory. What people lived here, and why did they leave? What ceremonies echoed in those courtyards? What trade goods flowed through the gates, and what songs rose into the air above the stone towers? The story begins with the granite itself. Across the Zimbabwe plateau, massive granite outcrops lie scattered, their surfaces weathering into rounded boulders. From these, the people of centuries past quarried their stone. They split the granite with patient hands, creating rectangular blocks, each carefully fitted against the next without mortar. One stone held another by weight alone, and together they created walls so stable they defied time. In some places, the walls rise to 11 meters high, stretching for hundreds of meters. Seen from above, they form flowing curves, as though someone had traced a great sweeping design across the land. The hill complex, perched high above the plain, was among the first to be built. Its walls follow the natural outcrops, creating enclosures that suggest ritual or leadership. The climb to its summit, even today, feels deliberate. One ascends through narrow passages where the walls press in on either side, until the view suddenly opens to the plateau below. Standing there, one can imagine a leader surveying the land, or a priest calling down blessings. Beneath, the great enclosure sprawls, its outer wall enclosing nearly 250 meters of space. Inside rises the famous conical tower, a solid stone structure whose purpose remains unclear. It is not hollow, and so it could not have been used for storage. Some believe it symbolized abundance, perhaps echoing a granary's shape, a promise of food security for the people. Others see it as a marker of authority, a silent stone reminder of the ruler's presence. Archaeological discoveries here speak to a society that thrived on trade. Beads of glass from distant lands, porcelain from China, and Arabian coins have all been uncovered within the walls. From this, one sees that Great Zimbabwe was not isolated. It stood at the center of networks stretching across continents. Its wealth likely built on gold mined in the region and traded through Swahili ports along the Indian Ocean. Caravans may have wound their way across the land, carrying ivory, copper, and salt, converging upon this stone city where leaders and merchants exchanged goods beneath the shadow of granite walls. And yet, trade alone cannot explain the city's grandeur. Its architecture speaks to social order, to a complexity beyond commerce. The careful placement of walls created divisions between spaces. Certain enclosures appear designed for elites, while others may have housed commoners. The separation of the hill complex from the great enclosure suggests hierarchies of access, places where few could enter, and others where ceremonies unfolded before larger gatherings. When one walks through the passageways, it is easy to feel the design guiding the body, directing movement, shaping experience. The stones whisper not only of order but of artistry. The walls, though built for strength, carry subtle beauty. Some curve in graceful arcs, others include chevron patterns worked into the stone, or herringbone designs set into the courses. These are not the choices of builders working only for defense. They are marks of intention, of aesthetics, of meaning woven into stone. Perhaps the patterns carried symbolic weight, echoing ideas of fertility, lineage, or spiritual balance. The fact that we cannot know only deepens the sense of mystery. Over centuries, the city grew. At its height, Great Zimbabwe may have housed 15,000 to 20,000 people. Huts of clay and thatch filled the valleys, while leaders occupied stone enclosures. Livestock grazed nearby, and fields stretched across the plateau. Life here was vibrant, sustained by the rhythms of agriculture and the pulse of trade. In the cool of evening, fires would have flickered against stone walls, voices carrying songs or stories into the night. Children might have run through narrow passages. Elders gathered in courtyards, traders counted beads, priests tended shrines. Though the city's silence today feels overwhelming, once it would have been alive with sound. But like all cities, Great Zimbabwe eventually faced decline. Around the 15th century, people began to leave. The reasons remain debated. Some suggest that soil exhaustion and deforestation strained resources. Others point to shifts in trade, as coastal ports grew in power and drew commerce away. Perhaps political rivalries weakened the center, or climate changes made the land less fertile. Whatever the cause, the stone walls remained, even as huts crumbled and voices faded. Abandoned, the city became a mystery to outsiders. When Europeans encountered it centuries later, they could not believe Africans had built such grandeur. Myths spread of foreign builders, Phoenicians, Arabs, even biblical figures. But archaeological evidence has long since silenced those falsehoods. Great Zimbabwe was African in origin, the creation of Shona-speaking peoples who left their imprint in stone. Walking today within the great enclosure, one feels the echo of those builders. The stones are weathered but still firm. The tower rises with quiet strength, indifferent to centuries of speculation. Birds circle above the hill complex, their cries mixing with the rustle of grass. The silence here is not empty, it is filled with memory, layered into the granite, waiting for those who listen with patience. In the valley ruins, one can trace the remains of dwellings. The faint outlines of huts mark the spaces where families once lived. Shards of pottery still surface, smoothed by time, each fragment a reminder of daily life. Perhaps a woman once carried water in those vessels, or a child ate from them. The ordinary details of life linger in these broken pieces, grounding the grandeur of the walls in human hands. Legends persist among local communities. Stories tell of spirits dwelling in the ruins, of voices that echo among the stones at night. Some say the conical tower hums with energy, its silent bulk charged with ancestral power. Others believe the hill complex is a place of communion with ancestors, where the living may still seek guidance. These stories, though unverifiable, show how the ruins remain alive in imagination, their mystery, a thread linking past and present. The name Zimbabwe itself comes from these ruins. In the Shona language, Zimbabwe means houses of stone. From this, the modern nation drew its identity, placing Great Zimbabwe at the heart of national heritage. Today, visitors from around the world walk its paths, guided by historians and archaeologists, yet still left with questions. For even as research uncovers trade links and construction methods, the heart of the city eludes full explanation. Why these patterns in stone? Why the conical tower? What ceremonies took place within? The stones resist final answers, guarding their secrets with patient silence. As evening settles over the plateau, the granite glows in the last light. Shadows stretch across the walls, softening their edges. The air grows cooler, and the calls of night creatures begin. In that moment, the ruins seem to breathe. The city of stone does not speak in words, yet it communicates through presence. Its walls rise without mortar, held together by the weight of time, and in their endurance lies their voice. They tell us that human ambition, artistry, and community can leave marks that outlast centuries. They remind us that silence can hold more than noise, that absence of inscription can still carry meaning. And so, Great Zimbabwe stands. Its walls curve across the land, rising from the granite outcrops like extensions of the earth itself. Built by hands long gone, inhabited by lives now silent, it remains not a ruin of despair but a monument of resilience. The stones speak without mortar, and though their language is one of mystery, it is also one of awe. To stand among them is to listen, not for answers, but for presence. The walls do not explain themselves, but they endure, and in their endurance, they tell the story of a city that once thrived, a people who once dreamed, and a heritage that still shapes the land of Zimbabwe today. The burial ship that carried a fallen king. The earth holds many stories, but few are as hauntingly poetic as the tale of a ship buried not upon the sea, but deep beneath the soil. In a quiet corner of Norway, where the fjords cut their way into the land, and pine forests whisper in the wind, archaeologists uncovered something that felt less like a discovery and more like the unsealing of a memory. It was not a ruin of stone, not a fragment of broken pottery, but a ship, a vessel built to ride the waves, laid to rest in the embrace of the earth, as though it were carrying its master on a final voyage to a world unseen. This was the Oseberg ship, carved from oak and resting beneath a mound of soil. It was built in the early 9th century, during the height of the Viking Age. Yet what was strange, what sent ripples of fascination through those who first gazed upon it, was the way it had been preserved. Not as wreckage, not as driftwood cast aside by storms, but as a monument to a funeral. The ship was not meant to sail again, at least not across earthly waters. It was meant to carry its passenger, the body of someone held in the highest regard, into eternity. When the mound was opened in 1904, the silence that spilled from within seemed almost deliberate, as though time itself had been holding its breath. Beneath the weight of turf and clay lay the ship, stretching nearly 70 feet in length, its prow curling upward like the head of a serpent, its stern sweeping skyward with equal grace. The wood was carved with patterns of swirling beasts, their bodies intertwining in endless knots, as if to remind the viewer that life and death were never truly separate, but woven into one unbroken design. What the excavators found inside was not simply a tomb, it was a story told in wood, fabric, iron, and bone. Within the ship lay the remains of two women, their bones fragile with age, but their presence commanding even across the centuries. One, older, with a body showing the marks of illness, and another, younger, whose identity was less clear. Who they were has never been fully resolved, whether queen and servant, priestess and acolyte, or perhaps a pair bound together in a way now beyond our understanding. Yet their burial was unlike anything ordinary. This was not the grave of common folk, it was an honor of the highest kind. Surrounding them, the ship was filled with offerings, as though an entire world had been gathered and placed aboard. Wooden carts, richly carved, stood by their side. Sleighs, yes, sleighs built for gliding across winter snows, rested where the sea-bound vessel's ribs enclosed them. Bed frames, woven tapestries, wooden buckets and chests filled the chamber. The bones of sacrificed animals were scattered among them. Horses, dogs, oxen, companions for the journey to come. It was as though the builders of this tomb wished to ensure that every need of the women would be met, even beyond the grave. The grave goods spoke of wealth and artistry. A ceremonial cart, its sides carved with interlacing animals, seemed too delicate for the mud and stones of daily use. It was not meant for travel upon rough paths, but for processions, for rituals that might draw the gaze of gods. The sleighs, too, were not plain. They bore carvings, patterns of creatures half familiar, half imagined. Even in tools of transport, the Vikings folded in their sense of myth, their blending of the natural and supernatural, and then there was the ship itself, built of oak planks overlapping one another in the clinker style, fastened with iron rivets. It was both practical and beautiful. With 30 oar holes it could have carried a crew across the open sea, riding waves from Norway to distant lands. Its keel and ribs spoke of strength, while its prow rose like a dragon, curling in a spiral that suggested both menace and grace. It was a vessel meant not just for travel, but for presence. To see it approaching would have been to see power, embodied in wood. Yet here it lay, grounded, buried not by accident but by design, transformed from a tool of war or exploration into a cradle for death. The burial mound itself was part of the message. To raise earth over a ship was no simple labor. It meant gathering soil, turf, stones, and piling them high until the vessel lay hidden beneath. To the community that built it, the act was both a farewell and a declaration. This was not just the passing of individuals, it was the marking of their significance, the sealing of their names into the land itself. From the hill that rose above, future generations would have seen the mound and remembered that within it rested greatness. And yet, the ship did not remain untouched. Long before modern archaeologists uncovered it, grave robbers had already dug their way inside. They took what they valued, precious metals, jewels, items that glimmered with wealth, and left behind the rest. The bodies, too, had been disturbed, their bones scattered. The loss is felt even today, for we can only imagine what treasures were carried off into the hands of thieves centuries ago. But what remained was still astonishing, still powerful. Enough to speak of a world where death was not the end, but another kind of journey. As the Oseberg ship was studied, a picture emerged not only of the individuals buried there, but of the Viking Age itself. This was no simple culture of raiders, as they are often portrayed. Here was evidence of ceremony, of reverence, of artistry that reached beyond survival and conquest. The carvings, the textiles, the structure of the burial, all pointed to a people deeply invested in ritual, in symbolism, in the weaving of their lives into patterns that extended into death. There is something profoundly moving about the way the ship itself becomes the axis of the story. Ships were life to the Vikings. They carried them across fjords, across seas, to lands they would raid, trade with, or settle. The ocean was both their path and their peril. To place the dead within a ship was to acknowledge this truth, that the vessel was not just wood and iron, but a bridge. It connected the living with the dead, the known world with the unknown, the shore with the horizon. When one stands before the Oseberg ship today, preserved within its museum in Oslo, the quiet is almost the same as it must have been when it first lay beneath the mound. The wood, darkened by time, still carries its carvings. The prow still rises like a question mark, as though pointing forward toward something unseen, and in its presence one cannot help but feel that the ship is still waiting, still holding its passengers close, still ready to sail if only the right tide should come. Other ship burials have been found across Scandinavia, but few rival the Oseberg in its preservation and grandeur. Each discovery adds another layer to our understanding of the Viking way of death. These were not mere graves, they were vessels of memory, vessels of belief. To lay a king, a queen, or a revered figure within a ship was to affirm that their life was not bound to land alone, but to the eternal voyage of water and wind. And so the burial ship of Norway remains one of history's most evocative finds. It is not simply the wood, or the objects, or the bones that matter, but the image of a people who believed that even in death, one does not lie still, one continues onward, borne by the same ships that had always carried them, now sailing across horizons that could never be charted. The Cave of Painted Hands across time. High on the plateau where the winds sweep endlessly across the steppe, there lies a canyon carved by rivers older than memory. The walls are red and ochre, worn into strange shapes by water and time. And somewhere within this rugged gorge, hidden like a secret kept by the land, is the cave that would one day be called the Cave of the Painted Hands. Long before it bore that name, long before it drew the attention of scholars and travelers, it was simply a place where people came to leave their mark upon the world. Not with words or monuments, but with the most personal of symbols, the outline of their own hands pressed against stone. To enter the cave is to feel time stretch in two directions at once. The present moment lingers at your shoulder, but with each step, you feel the pull of thousands upon thousands of years. The air grows cooler as you move inward, the sound of the outside wind fading until all that remains is the faint echo of your breath. The walls begin to whisper in colors, shades of red, black, white and ochre, sprayed or brushed across the rock surface. And there, most striking of all, are the hands. Dozens, then hundreds, layered upon each other, like a crowd frozen in the act of reaching out across the ages. The people who made these images lived in Patagonia some 9,000 years ago, perhaps longer. They were hunter-gatherers, their lives bound to the cycles of animals and seasons. Guanacos roamed the plains then, their herds providing meat, hides, and sinew for those who pursued them. The cave gave shelter not only from the winds but from time itself, a place where moments could be preserved long after bones and campfires had crumbled away. When one stood in that shadowed space, pressing hand to stone and blowing pigment through a hollow reed, they could not have known that what they left would endure so long. And yet, their presence still lingers. Silent, insistent, undeniable. Archaeologists speak of the pigments ground from minerals, iron oxides for red and ochre, manganese for black, kaolin for white. They imagine the careful grinding of stone into powder, the mixing with animal fat or water, the preparation of a reed or hollow bone to use as a sprayer. Yet there is something beyond the chemistry of color that speaks here. Each handprint is a gesture, a claim, a message not meant to fade. Some scholars believe these marks were part of rituals, perhaps initiation rites, perhaps records of belonging, perhaps something we cannot name. The truth lies in silence, but the silence is eloquent. If you stand in the cave long enough, your eyes adjust to the dimness, and patterns begin to emerge. Some hands are small, delicate, likely belonging to children or young women. Others are broad and strong, the hands of hunters. They are not solitary impressions but layered, one upon another, as though each generation sought to join a chorus that had begun before them. Some show missing fingers, whether by accident, deformity, or deliberate choice remains a mystery. The effect is haunting, as though the rock face has become a living wall of presence, a gathering that has never dispersed. Outside, the landscape stretches in a vast silence. The Rio Pinturas runs through the valley, its waters cutting through the steppe, carving the gorge that hides the cave. The people who came here would have followed its course, drawn by the shelter of the cliffs and the abundance of game. Imagine them approaching at dusk, fire-lit torches flickering against the rock, voices echoing faintly as they entered. The smell of burning wood, the sharp scent of minerals, the weight of night pressing down upon the plateau, all of it mingling with the act of creating something that would outlast them. The act itself must have been simple yet profound. A hand pressed flat against stone, pigment blown across its edges, the hand withdrawn to reveal a perfect silhouette. In that moment, an individual transformed into something more. They became part of a pattern, a rhythm, a continuity that reached beyond themselves. Whether they sought to speak to their community, to the spirits of the land, or to future generations, the result is the same. Their presence remains, but the cave holds more than hands. Among the stenciled prints are depictions of animals, guanacos, felines, hunting scenes, geometric patterns whose meaning is lost to us. These images remind us that those who lived here were not merely leaving signatures but telling stories. They were recording their world, the creatures they pursued, the rhythms of the hunt. In the flickering light of fire, these painted walls would have come alive, the animals seeming to move as shadows danced across their forms. Perhaps the cave was not only a gallery but a theater, a place where memory and myth were performed upon stone. Archaeologists debate whether the cave was a sacred site or a communal gathering place. Perhaps it was both. The repetition of the handprints suggests ceremony, but ceremony need not be solemn. One can imagine children laughing as they press their small hands against the wall, the spray of pigment leaving them giggling at the outline it created. One can imagine elders guiding the process, ensuring the colors were right, the placement deliberate. Over centuries, the ritual continued, layering mark upon mark, until the cave became dense with memory. When European explorers first encountered the site, they could scarcely believe its age. To see so many hands, so vivid after millennia, was to feel the weight of human time collapse into an instant. Here were people who had lived, hunted, laughed, and mourned long before cities rose, before writing took form, before empires spread across continents. Their world was different, yet their gesture reaching out with an open hand was familiar. In that familiarity lies the cave's power. It bridges the chasm of time, not with explanation but with presence. Consider the silence of the steppe at night. The wind moves through the grasses, and stars burn fiercely in the clear sky. A fire crackles at the mouth of the cave, where hunters rest after a long pursuit. They eat, they speak, they listen to the night. Then, one by one, they step inside, carrying torches. The flamelight reveals the wall already crowded with hands, and each chooses a place to add their own. There is no rush, no need for words, the act itself is enough. One presses their hand, exhales pigment, withdraws. Another follows. In time, the wall becomes a constellation of humanity, each star a life, each outline a memory. The pigments, too, were not chosen by accident. Red, the color of blood and life. Black, the color of death and night. White, the color of bone and spirit. Each carried symbolic weight. Each spoke in a language we may never fully understand but can still feel. To mix and spray these colors was to invoke something beyond mere decoration. It was to inscribe meaning into stone. The hands themselves are strangely intimate. Unlike tools, weapons, or ornaments which speak of function, a hand is personal. It is the part of us that touches, that holds, that creates. To see the outline of a hand from thousands of years ago is to feel an almost physical connection to the person who left it. They pressed their skin against the same stone you now gaze upon. Their breath carried the pigment that created the outline. The distance between you shrinks, until it seems as though you could almost clasp their hand in return. The cave has endured because of its remoteness, its concealment within the canyon walls. For centuries, it lay unnoticed by the wider world, visited only by those who lived near it, who inherited its meaning through oral tradition. When at last it was studied, it revealed not just art, but continuity, the presence of human beings across millennia. Radiocarbon dating suggests that people returned to the cave again and again over thousands of years, each generation layering their presence atop the last. Few places in the world carry such an unbroken record of human expression, and yet, for all we know, there is so much we cannot. We do not know what words were spoken as the hands were pressed. We do not know what songs were sung, what prayers were whispered. We do not know why some hands are missing fingers, or why certain colors dominate certain sections. We can guess, we can study, but the cave keeps its secrets. Perhaps that is its gift. It does not offer answers but invites us to stand in its silence and feel. As dawn breaks outside the gorge, the light spills into the valley, catching on the Rio Pinturas as it winds its way across the land. The guanacos stir, the birds rise, and the world continues as it has for thousands of years. Inside the cave, the hands remain unchanged, untouched by the passage of time. They do not fade with the rising sun, nor do they yield their mystery. They simply endure, as though waiting for each new visitor to step inside and join the quiet assembly of presence. To walk back out into the daylight is to carry with you a sense of weight. The hands are not just images, they are reminders. They tell us that long before monuments, before written words, before the great sweep of history, human beings sought to leave their trace. They sought to say, simply, we were here. And in their persistence, they succeed. They are here still. The silence of the valley held steady, as though the air itself had settled into the rhythm of centuries. The painted hands on the rock wall waited in their patient stillness, their fading pigments not so much eroded as absorbed into the stone itself, like thoughts etched onto memory that refused to be forgotten. In the dim recess of the cave, the faint glow of filtered sunlight played across them as the day moved slowly on. Shadows stretched, softened, and then shifted again. If you watched long enough, it was as if the hands themselves moved, reaching, withdrawing, drifting across the surface like the tide. The mind, lulled by the patterns, might imagine 1,000 different stories, and perhaps long ago that was precisely the purpose. The people who pressed these hands onto the stone lived lives as fleeting as the seasons, yet here they remained, unmoving, unblinking, unchanging. The cave became their anchor, their ledger, their witness. It did not speak in words, yet it carried a language all its own, measured not in phrases but in gestures. One could imagine the maker of a handprint pausing before the wall. Perhaps they stood in silence first, listening to the calls of guanacos in the distance, to the scraping of wind along the rocks, to the murmur of kin nearby preparing a meal. Then they placed their palm against the cool surface, ground ochre into powder, mixed it with animal fat or spit, filled their mouth with the mixture, and sprayed it in a cloud over their hand. The act was as intimate as it was enduring. It was not only art, it was breath, a whisper of life, caught mid-exhale, held forever in the shadow of a hand. And so, one after another, the walls filled, hands layered over hands, not always neat, not always aligned, sometimes faint, sometimes strong. Some belonged to men, broad and long, some to women, smaller but firm. Many to children, their palms delicate, their reach tentative yet bold in presence. What were they declaring? Perhaps nothing but the simple truth: we are here. As centuries passed, others returned to add their marks. Different groups, different tribes, different times, yet they shared the same instinct, to leave themselves behind in the same place. What began as a wall of hands became a lineage carved without stone, written without words. The longer one studies them, the more patterns emerge. Some hands appear clustered together in spirals, as though forming a circle of belonging. Others overlap so heavily that the prints blur into a dense shadow, as though one generation did not wish to stand apart but rather lean upon the traces of those before. In places, negative hands, the outlines left after pigment was sprayed around the palm, face upward, as though reaching toward the heavens. Others face downward, pointing into the earth. Still others seem to angle sideways, as though gesturing toward the path through the valley. Each choice could carry meaning, or none at all. Yet the repetition suggests deliberation, a language not entirely lost but not entirely remembered either. The cave became more than art, it became a ritual. We might imagine ceremonies carried out by firelight within its walls. Flames would leap and flicker, shadows stretching the painted hands until they danced across the stone, making them appear alive. Children might huddle close, eyes wide, as elders spoke of spirits and ancestors, of the handprints belonging to those who watched over them still. The cave may have been seen as a threshold, where the living could speak to the dead, and the dead could linger among the living. Over time, the valley outside changed, climates shifted, herds wandered differently, tools evolved from stone to sharper forms, but the cave endured, and whenever people returned, they found the same hands waiting for them, patient as ever, listening, watching. Perhaps some of them pressed their own hand atop one left centuries before, feeling the strange alignment of flesh upon faded pigment, as if shaking hands across the gulf of time. Archaeologists who have studied these walls note that the pigments used were made from local minerals: ochre reds from iron oxide, blacks from manganese, whites from kaolin, yellows from natural clays. Nothing exotic, nothing imported, just earth transformed. Yet it was not the materials themselves that mattered. It was the act of choosing to preserve presence. The simplest resources became the canvas of eternity. And in this simplicity lies the cave's enduring mystery. Unlike carvings of animals used for hunting magic, or symbols meant for guidance, the handprints speak in directness. They do not depict anything outside of themselves. They do not tell a story of conquest, nor show a landscape, nor record an event. They only show the hand, and in that choice, they are universal. For what could be more human than the hand? It touches, it builds, it nourishes, it comforts, it fights, it creates. To leave one's handprint is to leave not a symbol of something else, but the very outline of the self. The people of the cave seemed to understand this long before words could capture it. As the centuries drifted on, the Cave of Hands became a landmark for those who passed through the valley. Travelers would stop, rest, and add their mark. Over generations, it accumulated not only prints but presence. Each palm was a pause in a journey, a point of stillness amid motion. Some may have belonged to those who stayed in the valley their entire lives. Others may have belonged to wanderers who never returned, their only trace left behind as a single handprint layered among thousands. Even now, when the modern traveler enters the cave, there is a strange sensation of company. The air is quiet, but it is never empty. The hands on the walls gather around you like an unseen crowd, not hostile, not welcoming, simply present. It feels as though you have stepped into a room where a meeting has just adjourned, and all who were there left their signatures before departing. Their voices are gone, but their touch remains. What did the cave mean to them? Some scholars propose it was a ritual of belonging, each person confirming their place within the group. Others suggest it was a mark of passage, pressed by the young as they reached maturity. Some believe it was a spiritual act, a connection to the spirits of the land and sky, a silent prayer embedded in color. And others yet imagine it as something much simpler, a pastime, a communal gesture, a way to pass an evening beside the fire. But the truth, like the cave itself, refuses to be contained by only one answer, because meaning, like pigment, spreads. If you stand in that cave long enough, your own mind begins to paint meaning onto the walls. Perhaps you see them as messages from the past, perhaps as art, perhaps as ritual, or perhaps you simply see them as hands, hands that reached, hands that touched, hands that held. In this way, the cave becomes not only a memory of ancient lives, but also a mirror of your own. The wind outside the cave continues its endless work, scraping through the valley, sculpting the cliffs, carrying dust across distances. Yet inside, the hands remain untouched, sheltered. They stand as witnesses, not only to those who made them, but to all who come after. And so, the story of the cave continues, not in the hands that are already there, but in the eyes of those who look upon them. Each visitor adds their own layer, not in pigment, but in thought, in wonder, in the quiet moment of pause. The hands reach not only across stone, but across time. Generations who never met now touch each other in silence. Perhaps that is the truest meaning of the cave, not simply a wall of prints, but a wall of presence. A gathering that never disperses, a communion without words, a memory without end. And as you step away, the prints remain, still, patient, waiting for the next breath, the next gaze, the next thought to pass through their quiet chamber. The cave does not move. The cave does not speak. The cave does not change, yet somehow it is never the same. The serpent columns that whisper in ruins. The ruins lie silent beneath the modern world, but if you walk slowly, if you let your ears adjust to the wind that circles broken stones, you may begin to feel that something still lingers there. In Turkey, across a land where earth folds into plains and mountains, there is a column that once gleamed like coiled life, like scales catching the sun. It is known as the serpent column, and though only fragments remain now, its story winds back across millennia, reaching into the victories and the fears of ancient empires. The column itself was cast not to honor a god alone, but to hold together the memory of men, the warriors of Greece who faced the armies of Persia. But here, in the ruins where it stands, broken, worn, shifted from its first home, it feels older than victory and politics. It feels like a whisper carved into bronze, something made to last, something that carries meaning even after the words are forgotten. The serpent column was not born in Turkey. Its bronze was cast in Delphi, the sanctuary of Apollo, where prophecy and sacrifice shaped the lives of kings. In the 5th century before our era, a war tore the eastern Mediterranean apart. The Persian Empire had stretched across Asia, swallowing kingdoms and cities. When Xerxes marched westward, his army crossed seas and rivers, a tide of men that threatened to extinguish the fragile independence of the Greek polis. Yet, after years of battle, at Plataea, the Greeks prevailed. It was not just Athens that fought, nor only Sparta, but a coalition bound together by necessity, by the certainty that to submit meant to vanish. The victory at Plataea was immense, a shift in the course of history. To mark it, the Greeks gathered bronze from the weapons of their enemies, spears, shields, armor torn from fallen Persians, and melted them down. From destruction came creation, a single pillar, coiled as 3 serpents rising together, their bodies twisting upwards, their heads once supporting a great bowl or tripod. That bowl has long since disappeared, but for centuries it held sacred flames, a reminder of unity. At Delphi, the serpent column was not simply art, it was symbol, statement, memory. The names of the 31 city-states that had fought against Persia were inscribed upon it, etched forever into the bronze. Each name was a defiance, each letter a reminder that free men had resisted the empire of a king who called himself Lord of the world. To stand before it was to hear the story not only of victory, but of fragile alliance. The column, in its serpentine form, suggested eternity, wisdom, watchfulness. Bronze itself is stubborn against time, and so it was hoped the memory would never fade. But memory is never still. It moves, it changes, it is carried across places. In time, the column was moved from Delphi to Constantinople. The Emperor Constantine, founding his city, wished to gather relics of the past to adorn his new capital, to weave a sense of continuity between Greece, Rome, and the Christian empire he was shaping. And so the serpent column was uprooted, carried across land and sea, and set again in a new forum, surrounded by monuments that told of power and permanence. It is here, in modern Istanbul, that the serpent column still stands, or rather what is left of it stands. The serpent's heads, once crowned by fire, are gone, broken or stolen across centuries. The bronze is weathered, its sheen dulled, its form eroded by rain and wind. Yet even in this diminished state, it holds a kind of authority, a kind of quiet insistence that what it represents cannot be erased. The story of the serpent column is one of many layers. To look at it as only a relic of war is to miss its other meanings. The serpent is a universal symbol, a creature that appears in myths from every culture, guardian of treasure, bringer of wisdom, embodiment of eternity through the shedding of its skin. For the Greeks, serpents were often linked with prophecy, with chthonic gods, with healing. At Delphi, the home of Apollo, the serpent recalled Python, the ancient being slain by the god whose power lingered in the earth, whispering through the oracle. To coil serpents into a single column was to invoke that world of deep time, of truths hidden beneath the surface, and so the monument is double-voiced. It speaks of war and politics, but it also hums with myth and symbol, whispering things that cannot be entirely understood. It is perhaps this quality that makes it feel alive even now, even as its heads are gone, even as it is surrounded by the noise of traffic and modern life. To imagine it as it once was, is to step back into the moment of its making. The foundries of ancient Greece would have glowed with fire as bronze was melted, the clang of hammers echoing against stone. Craftsmen guided molten streams into molds, watching as the forms of serpents emerged. Their scales hinted in the flow of metal, their coils rising with perfect balance. When it stood completed, it would have caught the light in ways that made it seem to shift, alive with movement though unmoving. Pilgrims to Delphi would have lifted their eyes to see it, bowl raised high, flames flickering above the coiled bronze bodies, a reminder of both divine presence and human struggle. As centuries passed, kings came and went, empires rose and crumbled, yet the column endured. Its meaning shifted with each new context, yet something about its form resisted forgetting. When Constantine claimed it for his city, it ceased to be only a Greek monument. It became part of Roman legacy, and then Byzantine. Later still, under the Ottomans, it was left standing, not as a cherished relic but as an odd survivor, too stubborn to be removed, too strange to be ignored. Even damaged, it commanded imagination. Travelers wrote of it, speculated about its origins. Local legends grew, suggesting that the column held magical power, that it was a talisman protecting the city. Some said the serpents whispered at night, carrying secrets through the bronze. Others believed their presence kept away plague or invasion. The severing of their heads, in some stories, was an ill omen, a breaking of protection. These whispers of myth cling to the column, as ivy clings to stone. They are not provable, not historical, but they are part of what gives the object its aura, for history alone cannot explain why people return to such a monument again and again, why they pause before it, why they imagine voices in the bronze. Standing by it now in the Hippodrome of Istanbul, you may not at first notice it. Surrounded by other ruins and monuments, it does not rise high. It is modest in height compared to the obelisks that flank it, dwarfed by the city that sprawls around. But if you look closely, you will see the spiraling form, the remnants of coils, the way it narrows upward as though still striving to lift something unseen. Place your hand upon the bronze, and you might feel the faintest sense of time compressed, of centuries speaking together through metal that once was weapon, then monument, then relic. The bronze is cold, but the memory it holds is not. It is a warmth of human struggle, of artistry, of belief that something forged from destruction could last longer than those who made it. In the stillness of early morning, when the city is quiet, the column seems more itself. No tour groups, no chatter, no traffic, only the sound of wind slipping between buildings and the coiled bronze rising against the pale sky. It is in these moments that one can almost hear the whispers said to echo from the serpents. Perhaps it is only imagination, but perhaps imagination is precisely what such monuments are for. To keep alive a thread of connection, to make the present remember the past, not through words alone, but through presence, through form. The serpent column is a ruin, yes, but it is also a survivor. It is broken, but it is also whole in its persistence. Its coils still climb, still hold space, still remind those who pause to look that memory can be both fragile and enduring. And in that persistence there is something that feels alive, something that feels like a whisper in the ruins. The serpents seem to coil endlessly, even when one only traced them with thought instead of sight. Their braids, cast long ago in solid bronze, were so carefully wound that a viewer could almost believe the serpents were still alive, still moving in some hidden rhythm, though their motion had slowed to the pace of centuries. The broken heads that had once risen toward the heavens were gone now, lost to the passing ages, but the body of the column remained, standing in Istanbul's Hippodrome, as if it could never quite bring itself to fall. The silence around it was deceptive. Tourists who wandered past might take a few photographs, glance at the strange spiraled form, and then hurry on to gaze at the grander, more towering relics of empires. But the serpents, though headless, whispered still. Their whispers were not words in any one tongue. They were impressions that slid through cracks in memory, carried on wind, settling into whoever paused long enough to let the quiet sink in. Those whispers recalled a place before the city had been called Istanbul, before even Constantinople. They remembered Delphi. It was there, in that ancient sanctuary, that the bronze had first been melted and poured. More than 30 Greek city-states had joined their wealth to forge the serpents, each city chiseling its name along the curling base, like a chorus of voices bound into metal. They had gathered to celebrate a victory that had once seemed impossible. The Persian Empire's overwhelming armies, halted and defeated. The year was 479 BCE, and Greece had survived against the odds. Delphi's sacred precinct was the chosen site for their gratitude. The whispers recalled the sound of hammering. Bronze workers worked by firelight, their faces gleaming with sweat, their tools ringing in steady rhythm. They shaped the molten mass into 3 serpents entwined into one column, their bodies supporting a wide bowl at the top, a cauldron that blazed like the very sun when offerings were made. The serpents spoke of pride, of a moment when unity had briefly conquered division. Their heads once looked outward, their gazes turned to the horizons of the Greek world, as if to remind future generations of the strength found in standing together. But Delphi was not where the serpents would remain. Their whispers carried memory forward across oceans of time, across the ambitions of emperors. The column was uprooted from its sanctuary centuries later, carried eastward by Constantine the Great himself, when he sought to give his new city, Constantinople, the aura of ancient legitimacy. He wanted not just to build a capital, but to weave together fragments of the world's sacred past into one place. Temples were plundered, relics gathered, and the serpent column was planted in the hippodrome, where chariots thundered past and crowds roared in their thousands. There, the serpents saw centuries unfold like layers of woven cloth. Emperors paraded in triumph beneath their gaze. Foreign visitors from distant kingdoms stood in awe of the bronze column. The hippodrome itself became a theater of history. Revolts, coronations, victories, defeats, all witnessed silently by the entwined coils. The whispers were not always calm. Sometimes they hissed with warning, carrying faint echoes of fire and chaos. One voice told of 1204, when crusaders stormed Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. Flames devoured palaces, churches, libraries. The hippodrome, too, was not spared. The cauldron atop the column was taken, melted into coin, its blaze extinguished forever, and still the serpents remained, half shorn, their heads yet intact. They spoke of a time when the Ottomans arrived in 1453, transforming Constantinople into Istanbul. Sultans, too, walked past them, janissaries trained near them. And then, one night, a man's hand struck with force. Whether in drunken mischief or in deliberate defiance, none could be certain. A serpent's head snapped from the column. Another head followed in later years. Eventually, all 3 heads were gone. But the bodies endured, twisted and bound together, too deeply set in the ground to be pried free. The whispers told of fragments of those missing heads, scattered like the memories of a dream. One piece turned up centuries later, discovered in a museum collection, its details worn, but its identity unmistakable. The others were rumored to lie buried beneath Istanbul's streets, or hidden in forgotten storerooms. The serpents' voices thinned, but they did not cease, for the serpents remembered what humans often forgot, that monuments were not lifeless. They stored the weight of belief, of fear, of triumph. The bronze coils still carried within them the names of 31 city-states, etched faintly, most eroded beyond reading. But if one looked closely enough in the right light, letters flickered faintly, as though the bronze breathed them out in rhythm with the centuries. What did the serpents whisper now? Some said they warned of division, as they had once stood for unity. Others said they whispered secrets of time itself, keeping tally of rulers and revolutions. A few believed the serpents whispered in defense, a quiet promise that their presence helped guard the city, warding off misfortune. The column became more than a relic. It became a paradox, damaged, diminished, yet indestructible. Where marble crumbled and empires fell, the serpents still clung to the earth. Travelers wrote of them, from Byzantine chroniclers to Ottoman poets to European visitors on their grand tours. Each described the column differently, as though the serpents changed their faces depending on who looked. Some insisted the bronze still gleamed faintly at dawn, as though it remembered the fires that forged it. Others swore the coils shifted imperceptibly, as if alive, though no hand or eye could catch the movement. In modern times, archaeologists studied it carefully, measuring its spirals, tracing its inscriptions. They confirmed what legend had long whispered. The serpent column of Istanbul was indeed the very same offering, once set at Delphi, a relic that had witnessed the transition from gods to emperors to sultans. And yet, for all the science, mystery remained. No one could fully explain why the column endured, when so many other bronzes from antiquity had been melted for coin, lost to fire, or shattered by war. No one could explain why its whispers still lingered in the minds of those who lingered beside it too long, hearing faint hisses on the edge of thought. The serpents themselves seemed amused by the mystery. Their bronze bodies did not need heads to see. They had seen enough already. They would see more still, For as the city changed around them, trams clattering, cars honking, tourists passing with phones held high, the serpents endured, unchanged and unchanging, waiting in their silence. The hippodrome no longer echoed with racing chariots, yet the coils remained where they had always stood. They whispered to those willing to listen, to the curious, to the ones who paused and wondered why three serpents, cast in bronze nearly 2,500 years ago, still stood entwined in the heart of a living city. Perhaps, in the end, the serpents whispered only one truth, that time devours all, but memory, if cast deep enough into the earth, can outlast even empires. And in their coils, still tight, still strong, the whispers would remain, echoing not just what had been, but what might still come. Some mysteries remain unsolved, yet they keep whispering across time, inviting us to listen closer. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the forgotten and the unexplained. This is Unearthed Secrets, where the past never truly sleeps. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and let us know in the comments what mystery you'd like us to explore next. Until then, rest easy, and we'll meet again in the next secret.